Say the Pledge of Allegiance with us, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. First of all, to get us started, I need a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying A.
Okay. Yes.
Opposed? No. Motion carries. Ms. Pito?
Thank you.
I need a motion to approve the Board of Education meeting minutes for the December 4th, 2014 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Again, all in favor, please signify by saying A.
Okay.
Yes.
Opposed? No. Ms. Pito, it carries. Okay. At this time, we will do patron comments. The board values and appreciates your taking the time to provide your comments this evening. As a reminder to those who are making comments, the general practice of the board is not to respond to your comments at this time, but if appropriate, to provide a written response within a reasonable time period. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Matters related to employee negotiations, legal issues, real estate, personnel, and student matters are reserved for board discussion during their closed session. If a number of people are speaking on the same issue, please keep your comments to the 3-minute limit, and as much as possible, try not to repeat the same comments from previous speakers. Having that, I have 4 comment cards this evening. First of all, Mr. Tom Mueller. And I hope I pronounced that, is it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it to exactly 3 minutes. I think I got it down to 2 minutes and 57 seconds.
All right,
So
that'll
I'll speed
work.
read. For some kids, athletics and activities are more important than classroom education. It's not popular to say, but it's often true. Some kids go to school because it's the only way they can play sports. And sports teach them important life lessons. I was one of those kids. And I attribute the success I've had in my professional life with my sports experiences at least equally with what I learned in the classroom, maybe more. So why does this matter? Because the district has failed to address key needs for student athletes, especially at Eureka High School. I'm sure many of us can agree that sports have provided some unforgettable and incredibly motivating memories for young men and women. Do you remember the locker room scenes in movies like Any Given Sunday, Friday Night Lights, Remember the Titans, and Rudy? What did they all have in common? A locker room full of players, black and white, big and small, talented and not so talented, all united by their coach giving them an inspirational speech that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Now imagine if only half of those players got to see their coach give that speech. Well, that's what happens at every Eureka home football game, because the locker room is not big enough for all the players to see their coach. Eureka's locker room was built over 40 years ago when the school had nearly 1/3 of the students it has now, and it's kind of upsetting that we watched schools like Rockwood Summit get a newer, bigger locker room in just the past few years because they have fewer students and a locker room that was only half as old as Eureka's. Let me switch gears. Do you remember your senior homecoming? I bet a lot of people do, and I'm sure the 500 seniors this year at Eureka High School will never forget theirs either, because they spent it watching their home team play away at Parkway Central on homecoming night. Because the fields at Eureka High School were too wet to play on. It's a shame because schools in much less affluent districts like St. Clair, Washington, Hillsborough, Festus, and so many others have figured out a way to justify the cost versus the benefits of having field turf for their students to use for football, soccer, lacrosse, band, and PE. The 2010 study done by the Parkway School District to justify their investment in field turf concluded that school usage of a field would increase by more than 800% if grass were replaced by field turf. This particular improvement would benefit all 4 of the Rockwood High Schools. I could go on about the problems with Eureka's athletic facilities, from the weight room to the B gym to the swimming pool. The long and short of it is that the Eureka High School students have gotten the shaft. I've had 2 kids who have already come and gone through Eureka High School through graduation, and I've got one who's halfway done. It's time to give the students at Eureka High School the same opportunities to help shape them for a lifetime that students at the other 3 Rockwood High Schools have been able to receive. And it's time to spend money where it's needed. for schools that are older and growing, instead of evenly distributing that money across quadrants regardless of actual need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Have a second comment card from Cole Reed. Again, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Hi, my name is Corey, and I'm a junior and a 3-year varsity student athlete at Eureka High School. I've been blessed to have the opportunity to practice or play football, lacrosse, and basketball at every high school in the Rockwood and Parkway school districts, and the facilities at Eureka are substandard to them all. A great example of this is our homecoming game this year had to be moved to Parkway Central, as Mr. Mueller stated, due to a wet field. This was a disappointment to our entire student body and fans, as everyone participates in homecoming. But not all student organizations are provided with buses. When we traveled to the away game, which was our homecoming game at Parkway Central, our band did not have a bus and was not able to go to the game. I have friends that play at other schools, and they dread coming to play us at Eureka due to our crowded conditions and poor locker room. I was fortunate to volunteer my time, along with a group of concerned and fed-up parents, to clean, disinfect, and paint the locker room last year. We also installed a safe, donated bench that provided a place for us to sit and put on our uniforms. I was happy to help with this project, but could not help but feel like this was work that the school district should be responsible for. This certainly was nice, but did not fix many of our problems we still face, like the fact that our locker room is so small, our coaches are unable to gather the entire football team to address us as a team at halftime. Football is the ultimate team sport, and everybody should have a chance to hear our coach at halftime. Our teams are forced to use the locker room in shifts on days where we have practice. This cuts into our practice time, as we have to wait for certain groups to get out of the locker room before we can prepare. This also means that I get home at later times every day, which doesn't allow me to have as much time for homework. Despite our facilities and inadequacies, I have been lucky. At least I have a locker room. Many varsity athletes do not. They are forced to carry their equipment around with them all day until after school when they compete and change in the restroom. I'm honored to represent Eureka today, and I could not be more proud of our teams and the success we have enjoyed. But I begin to question and lose faith in the school district when we continue to fail to address the most basic needs of our facilities and allow one high school to fall far behind the rest. Please invest in my high school now. I may never have the privilege of utilizing these new facilities, but my brother, who is a freshman, certainly may, and other Eureka Wildcats to come. Thank you for your time and consideration. Now I have to go home and study for finals.
Good luck. Good luck with that. Thank you, Cole. Chris Reed.
Thank you. Good evening. Cole is my son, and I couldn't be more proud of him or his brother, and appreciate you allowing us the time to comment today. It's not to beat a dead horse about the facilities at Eureka High School. I think it's well documented that the challenges we've experienced there in our locker room and some of the needs that we have that are pressing today. It just feels like it might be the right time or the best time to reinvigorate this conversation. So that's our goal this evening. My wife and I, Becky, are committed to supporting our sons. We have two, and we're going to support them in whatever means necessary. And that means coming to talk to you today to encourage some of the activities that we see that could use help. You know, we moved here in 2007, and we specifically chose the district here, Rockwood, for the facilities, the opportunities for education, and everything that goes along with that. And since then, you know, we've had some challenges that the board has experienced, you know, with the community losing some of that faith, and we've had those two failed bond issues, which is obviously starting to manifest itself more prominently with the challenges with the facilities. So we just wanted to make that known and make sure that it's very clearly pointed out that we've got some severe challenges. And we're not in a position. I'm also on some of the booster clubs. We participate in baseball and basketball and lacrosse and football. And we're unable to, as an organization, to fill in some of those gaps and needs. We can do a lot of things that are those extra or peripheral needs that those organizations and teams have, we can fill in more. But some of these bigger ticket items, we're just unable to fill that gap. So that's where we really need the help. So I think there's a great, we have a new superintendent, new folks on the board. I think there's that great timing for that folks to capture that momentum and perhaps move this opportunity forward to remedy some of those facility needs. I also know it's been mentioned a couple times about the district and some excitement about turf fields. nobody's a bigger football fan than me. I'm from Texas. It's what we live and breathe, and I would love to see that. It would help us get over the challenges of homecoming, opportunities to utilize the fields and all that. I sincerely believe that. The one challenge I would have as being a Eureka parent would be a plan that would move forward that would provide all the schools in the district turf fields and neglect the basic need we have with facilities as far as locker room, gym floors, the pool and things like that. I would not be able to support that moving forward if that was the intent. I think we have to clear that first hurdle of those basic facilities needs at Eureka before we could fully support having turf everywhere. Believe me, I really want that. I just don't want that to get overlooked as we plan going forward. All right? Anyway, I would just ask for your leadership during this time. You guys have the power to influence, and I'm not saying do this for me. I'm saying I'll roll up my sleeves and help. We've done everything we can to rally people, to support bond issues, put out flyers, make phone calls, and we'll have the ability to do that going forward. So whatever we can do to help. This is a follow-up piece for me. I did send a letter to the board, so if you have any conversations, or please reply to that email and/or available for comment on the phone as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. I apologize if I read this name incorrectly. Will Franklin? Mr. Franklin, did I get that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board tonight. I'm actually here on behalf of my neighborhood, Williams Creek subdivision. Some of you may have gotten some of our feedback around the rezoning issues that you'll be talking about later in the meeting. I don't want to provide too much context, as I feel like some of that will be provided by Dr. Knost. We want to first off just thank Dr. Knost for coming to speak to us this past week, unsolicited, so we appreciate that. I felt like we met on some solutions that I feel comfortable that Dr. Knost can communicate to you later today. But wanted you to know that we're here, we're supportive of the district, we're open to compromise. However, we want to also acknowledge that part of the challenge and why you all receive such spirited feedback from us is that you've been successful with Stanton Elementary, and we're not happy about the plans to do some of the rezoning from Stanton to Kelliston. Not that Kelliston is a bad school, and I apologize to principal. I felt like he got the rough end of the stick the other night in our meeting, but it wasn't about that, and I hope he didn't take that personally. But we really support Stanton, and we appreciate the board hearing our considerations. We've handed Dr. Knost a petition from our neighborhood, and he's been very helpful and responsive with our concerns, and we'll feel comfortable with him communicating that to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Knost for superintendent comments.
Yes, thank you. Got a couple different sources here, so I'll get myself straight. First of all, just a little bit of an update, and Mr. Beto can correct me if I'm wrong, but on board candidate filings, the filing for board candidacy is now open, and it closes on January the 20th. And of course, we have 2 3-year terms to fill and 1 1-year term to fill. And we currently have 2 that have applied as candidates for the 3-year term, and that is Rob Castle and Jamie Bays. And then we have 1 apply as the 1-year term, that is Herman Kriegshauser. And again, those opportunities to file will stay open until January the 20th. So that's an update on our board filings. A couple things is, many of you know, I've completed actually about halfway through my second tour of all Rockwood classrooms, and I hope to complete at least a third, if not a fourth, by the time the year is out. Really important to me to make sure students know who their superintendent is, and to have that face time with teachers and to see what's going on. It's what we're really here for, is the kids and supporting the teachers in the classroom where the real magic happens. But there's many people that I haven't had the opportunity to meet or talk to, and that's why I'm asking everyone to consider taking a 10-minute time frame, 5 to 10 minutes, to complete a short survey for me. I want to know what you think about Rockwood. I want you to know I want to know what you think about at least your perceived direction of where we are going, and what you think our priorities should be. The survey is available It's open now. It's available initially at least until January the 7th. I'm also supplying that survey for all of the staff, and you can find that on the Rockwood website. So I would greatly appreciate your feedback. Let me know a little bit about my leadership, your perceptions of my leadership, and where we're going, and the direction of the district at this time. That'd be very helpful to me, and I think to the board as well. Thank you in advance for considering that. Lafayette volleyball coach Zach Young was named the Volleyball Coach of the Year once again. As we talked at an earlier meeting, the Lancers won the state title again this year. That's 4 in a row. So congratulations to Coach Young. Rockwood Summit Teacher and Missouri Teacher of the Year, Jamie Manker, is competing for $1 million prize against candidates from all around the world. You probably maybe saw this coverage in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The Global Teachers Prize judge applicants on how they open up their pupils' minds, their contributions to the community, and their encouragement of others to become teachers. And I think if I understand it right, it's down to 50, and Jamie is one of those 50. So that's pretty impressive for $1 million prize. So let's keep pulling for Jamie. She is really represents quality and represents Rockwood. Rockwood students and teachers continue the tradition of giving in Rockwood. Several schools have been holding food drives, clothes drives, and adopting families for the holidays. It's when you get around to the schools as much as I do, it's really fun to see how prevalent that is in our district. It's a big part of the everyday life of our kids to learn those important character pieces about giving back. It's impressive. Green Pines Assistant Principal Angie Schott has been awarded Outstanding Assistant Principal by the St. Louis Suburban Elementary Principals Association. Baldwin Elementary Principal Dr. Rodney Lewis was also named the Exemplary New Principal. Great to have them on staff. Congratulations to both of them. And then finally, you may have heard this on the news, a little story about Mike Matheny, who has worn the number 22 on his jersey for a long time, but that's going to change because of one of the players that I think that is coming in. But he is changing his number to 26 in honor of Sean Glanville, who lost his life. But he was a former Lafayette student. Sean played hockey with Matheny's children, and so the families know each other very well. So I think if I saw it right in the news coverage, it was even a surprise to the family to some degree. But it's kind of neat that now every time you see Matheny go out to the mound wearing that 26, that represents one of our former students. So it's a pretty neat thing. And that's all I have tonight.
Any other board members with anything? Yes. Ms. Paul?
Well, it's not directly related to schools. I just want to say, I hope everybody has a great holiday, safe holiday, and there is a St. Louis County Winter Reading Club. Make sure your kids continue to keep their brains active during their off time, and keep things that are important first, family and your health, and that's it.
I'd just like to say real quickly, I know we don't comment on patron comments, but I coached and taught at Eureka High School for a long, long time. Cole, I'll say this, if your final tomorrow is in public speaking, you can go to bed early. I don't think you'll have to worry. Very proud when our students get before a group like the Board of Education, and they're as articulate as our students always seem to be. It makes me proud to be a Lafayette graduate, a former Rockwood teacher, and a Eureka coach. And I know that Mr. Whipke feels the same way because he's beaming over there. So thank you. And no other comments. We'll move along. I need a motion to accept tonight's consent agenda as proposed.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right. All in favor, please signify by saying yay.
Yeah. Yes.
Opposed, no. Ms. Vito, it passes. All right, next on the agenda is the annual audit management report and year-end financial statements. Mr. Dan Steinbrugge, and I'm going to ask you, Mr. Steinbrugge, to introduce our accountant that's going to be here with you this evening, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Knows, members of the board. We have finalized the financial results for the year ended June 30, 2014, and we presented the results to you tonight in the reports. I would like to introduce Brian Wirtz, partner with Kerber Ackenbreckel, to help us share the results of the audit with you.
Good, thanks, Dan. Good evening. My name is Brian Wirtz. I'm a partner with Kerber Ackenbreckel. We're the independent auditors of the school district. As Dan said, we have finished our audit and have issued our report, which, I don't know if you noticed or not, is 100 pages. So we're not going to cover every page today, unless you want to.
No.
But so what I'd like to do is just sort of give you an overview of our audit, and then answer any questions if anybody has any. In this report, like I said, it's 100 pages long, and there's a lot of information in this report. And there's a lot of information that's audited and a lot of information that's unaudited. And I'll explain that in a little bit later. But so this audit report, in the beginning, there's the transmittal letter that's prepared by the district, which is unaudited. Then we get into certain demographic information of the Board of Education and that sort of thing. And one of the most important pieces, I think, in this package is the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting, that the district submits the CAFR and gets it reviewed by BOASBO, and they issue the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. The district's been getting that for a number of years, but we got it again this year, so you should be proud of that. And the comments that we receive from them as it relates to improvements or things that they think are wrong are very minimal. So we're getting this down to very few comments at all. So you should be excited about that. Then we get into our independent auditors report, where we explain what we did, what your responsibilities are, and what our responsibilities are, and I'll get to that in a second. The management's discussion and analysis, which is prepared by management, unaudited because it's not financial information, but it describes the current year financial results and plans for the future of the district. So it's important information, an integral part of the financial statements. Then we get into the financial statements themselves, which the first set of financial statements are the government-wide financial statements, which are prepared on the full accrual basis of accounting, much like a for-profit entity. Then we get into the fund financial statements that is basically shows each fund that the district uses, the 4 funds that the district uses. And that's prepared on the modified accrual basis of accounting. The difference between the two then there's a reconciliation for the balance sheets of the two, and there's a reconciliation of the income statement on the two. And the biggest reconciling items are fixed assets and depreciation. On your fund financial statements, there is no depreciation, and your fixed assets are an expense. And on the government-wide financial statements, those are balance sheet items. The depreciation is an expense where it's not on the fund financial statements, and the fixed asset is an asset versus an expenditure. And then the biggest difference on the liability side is general obligation debt is an expense. Payments on general obligation debt is an expense. If you issue bonds, it's revenue on the fund financial statements, but on the government-wide financial statements, they're liabilities. So if you issue bonds, it's a liability. When you pay them, it reduces the liability. And they're significantly different in those two financial statements. Then we get into the proprietary fund financial statements, which are related to insurance, self-funded insurance, notes to the financial statements. Then there's required supplemental information, which is budget to actual related to the general and teachers fund. And then there's supplementary information, which is budget to actual for the other two funds, the capital projects fund and the debt service fund. A lot of statistical information that's required for the CAFR. And then we get into the state and federal compliance sections of the report. As explained in our audit opinion, I think it's laid out pretty well that basically it starts out, we were engaged to do an audit. And what is your responsibility? What's management's responsibility when it comes to an audit? And management's responsibility is to prepare the financial statements, determine that the basis of accounting used to prepare the financial statements is acceptable, and most importantly probably is you're required to design, implement, and maintain internal controls relevant to the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements that there would not be a material misstatement in the financials due to fraud or error. So it's basically saying you have to maintain a good internal control structure to safeguard the district assets. Our responsibility is then to take those financial statements and audit those financial statements. We perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, governmental auditing standards, and the OMB requirements under Circular A-133 as it relates to federal programs. The objective of our audit is to provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that there is not a material misstatement in the financial statements. Because we don't do 100% test of transactions, we can't give absolute assurance that there's not a material misstatement, but we're required to design and perform tests to get that to a low level. In planning and performing the audit, we're required to address risk where we think there are risks in the financial statements that would lead to a material misstatement. We then are required to design and perform audit procedures to address those risks and then issue our opinion. In developing the audit procedures, we also assess fraud risk, and we have conversations with management and employees within the district as it relates to fraud, if they're aware of any fraud. What would they do if they thought fraud was going on? Who would they report it to? So we do address fraud in the financial statements. In reviewing the internal controls of the district, we do not give an opinion on the internal controls. We review them, we test internal controls as they relate to federal programs, but we do not give an opinion on the internal controls. The types of audit opinion that we can give is an unmodified opinion, a qualified opinion, an adverse opinion, or a disclaimer opinion. We are issuing an unmodified opinion, which means that in our opinion, based on our audit, the financial statements are fairly stated and we have no reservations concerning the financial statements. So that's the best opinion you can get. There are 3 types of internal control weaknesses that we would be required to report to you during our audit. If we felt there was a deficiency in the internal controls, we would be required to report to you. If there is a control deficiency, which is an insignificant weakness in the internal controls, if there is a significant deficiency, which is a weakness in the internal controls that could lead to a material misstatement in the financial statements, or a material weakness, which is a significant deficiency that makes it reasonably possible that a misstatement in the financial statements would occur and go undetected. We're happy to report that we have none of those instances that need to be reported to you tonight. And then, as I said before, when we do our federal program, we do test internal controls, and if there were any internal controls related to the federal program audit, we'd be required to make you aware of that as well, and we have no instances to report on that. And then the last thing that we do is a state compliance as it relates to budget, attendance, and transportation. So we audit the district's compliance with those requirements. And again, if there was any instances of non-compliance, we would be required to report that to you, which there were not. Going through the audit report here, just on page 2, the audit team. I am the lead partner, so I'm ultimately responsible for the work that's performed for people under me and reviewing the audit and issuing the report and signing the report. Rick Grazza is a control partner, a quality control partner. All of our audits, before they're released, are reviewed by another partner within the firm that is not associated with the engagement, so they have a fresh set of eyes, and we have to get that through our quality control department before the audit can be released. Kaylee Patterson is the audit manager, and then we had an in-charge accountant and a couple staff auditors performing the work. We performed our audit in accordance with our engagement letter that was dated on August the 21st, 2014. The significant accounting policies used by the district are described in Note 1 to the financial statements. The district did adopt a new accounting policy this year, which was GASB 65. And if you look at page 18 of the report, which I don't know, you probably don't have a paper copy, but basically what it made us do was report certain deferred inflows and certain deferred outflows sort of below the line as an asset or below the line of a liability. So all it did was just move it within the balance sheet to a different location, so it had an immaterial effect on the financial statements themselves, but it was a new policy that was adopted. There were no transactions entered into by the district during the year which lacked authoritative guidance, and there were no significant transactions recognized in a different period in which they occurred. We're required to discuss with you estimates. There are estimates in the financial statements. The most significant estimates are depreciation, the useful life of assets, if we're depreciating these assets over the correct useful life, and the collection of accounts receivable. When we audit the estimates, management is required to formulate the estimates based on historical information and current information that they have. We audit those estimates and determine that they're reasonable, but actual results could differ significantly from that, so we're required to disclose that to you. The disclosures in the financial statement are neutral, consistent, and clear. We encountered no difficulties in performing our audit. There were no adjustments, audit adjustments, or past audit adjustments as a result of our audit procedures. We had no disagreements with management, and we did receive a management representation letter dated December the 10th, 2014, and that's the date of our audit opinion. That date's important because any subsequent events that happen between June 30th and the date we issue our report, we're required to analyze and determine if there's an adjustment or a disclosure in the fact that it needs to be done to the financial statements. Anything that happens after that date, we're not responsible for. So we do subsequent events up to that date. The management rep letter is basically management reporting to us that they answered all of our questions to the best of their ability, didn't withhold any information, made us aware of any contingent liabilities if there were any, or if there were any subsequent events that we should be aware of. To our knowledge, the district had no other consultations with any other accountants. And there were no, throughout the year, we will have discussions with management about accounting policies or adoption of GASBs. Those discussions were not contingent on us being retained as auditors, i.e. meaning we want to do this way. If you don't agree, we're going to get new auditors. So there were no conversations like that had. The next item just talks about what we do as it relates to the schedule of federal expenditures. And that's basically just reconciling that information within the financial statements themselves. This last section is basically telling you or advising you what we do as it relates to required supplemental information and what we do as it relates to supplementary information and other information. As I said before, the required supplemental information is unaudited because most of that information is non-financial in nature. Same way with the other information, which includes the introductory section, the statistical section, and the schedule of selected statistics. That's unaudited information. And then the supplemental information is audited by us, and that's the budget to actual for the debt service and capital projects funds. That's it. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from the board? Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Beto thinks I'm going to forget that we haven't done the motion yet, but I'm going to surprise her. I need a motion to accept the 2013-14 audit report, post-audit report, and Secretary of the Board report as presented.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor, please signify by saying yay.
Yay.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Ms. Beto, it passed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your work. Next is an information item on new subdivision attendance areas. Dr. Brown and Mr. Rooney are going to educate us.
And as they're settling in and getting ready here for their presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit and kind of set up a little bit of the background and what's behind what they're doing. I think everybody knows that obviously a big factor in successful schools is class size. The sizes of our classes, how many students are in our classes, sometimes relevant to the size of the actual physical structure, but most often just the number of children that any given teacher are working with. And schools always strive to have lower class sizes. I know that with my team, we've talked a lot about this since I've came in July, and you all approved some class sizes before I came in, and I've talked a lot how I would like to actually target even lower class sizes in the future, because I really think that to have significant impact on academic achievement, low class sizes, again, significantly lower class sizes are really the key, and that's how you keep a high level of achievement in a class along with solid curriculum and so many other things. But we have to be cognizant at all times of in any projected increases in enrollment throughout our districts. through our district and within our school boundaries. And it's important to note that, you know, larger districts, it's not uncommon for large districts to actually redistrict on occasion. And when I say redistrict, I mean redraw the entire boundaries within the district to balance every building. Well, I think you all know we're nowhere near balanced, and I actually think that that's to some degree a good thing, because that tells me before I arrived that there was some appreciation for the fact that there are other factors to consider besides just constantly disrupting lives and disrupting children and families by moving them about. Other districts practice that way. I'm glad that we haven't. There have been some years where we've done significant redistricting, but I don't think it should ever be a regular occurrence. So we've been looking specifically at new growth areas where we have some subdivisions coming in. That's where we want to pay some specific attention to, and that's what Dr. Brown and Mr. Rooney are going to focus heavily on tonight. There were 3 areas in particular. We were looking at the Eureka Elementary area. We were looking at the Stanton and Kellison area, and the Wild Horse and Chesterfield area, those all together. Again, there were some specific new developments and subdivisions they were looking at. They're going to talk about that and explain what they are. What I asked them to do is to propose some possible ways to deal with those subdivisions, some potential shifts that could target the numbers away from the buildings that were getting high. Stanton, for one, is one that we're a little worried about in the coming years, because those numbers are getting up there, and if we look at projections, they're going to continue to grow. Wild Horse is another one. We're worried a little bit about those numbers, maybe not as urgent as Stanton. And Eureka definitely is one that we also are worried about. And I'm going to mention the Eureka piece really quick, because I don't believe that's in the presentation. We resolved for now the Eureka situation. We're going to resolve it, kind of handle it on a management level in a little different way, because we're not entirely clear on what all is happening with subdivisions pertaining to Eureka. Originally, because what we are aware of, some new developments, the new developments that we are aware of and that we know about, there was some logic of trying to figure out some kind of a transition of kids from Eureka to where they would actually go to Blevins. Our concern is that we think there may be more development on the horizon that, as we've told you before in our facilities study, that may even would cause us to consider building a new Eureka Elementary, because of the age and the amount of money that we put into it and all those ratios that we consider with the money put into an old building like that. If that were to happen, it's potentially possible that any shift we would make now would then maybe have to shift back. And that would really be messing with families, and we just don't want to do that. So what we're doing is we're moving the early childhood classes out of Eureka Elementary and putting those early childhood where there's room for them at Blevins, which will open up some room for our other classes at Eureka. So that was kind of an easy fix for now. The other 2 areas, we don't have opportunities like that, so we've got to look at other things over time. The one thing I want to point out, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brown and Mr. Rooney. These conversations are never easy. They're always emotional, and it's understood. We should all be able to understand why that's the case, because when you start talking about changes and what people are used to where they live, or potentially their families, and I've been involved in redistricting to different degrees and many levels all through my career, and Dr. Revelay and I were talking today. We remember back, as Dr. Kinder will, when we did the redistricting, when we added Marquette High School and added Summit, it was painful for a lot of people to think they weren't going to go to Lafayette High School, because tradition had been the case. So it's always a lot of emotion involved, and we get that. I get that as a dad. I get it, and I've lived through it as an administrator. So the only guideline really given to the folks that were trying to come up with proposals for me to ultimately work with and get feedback from from parents and community members, and then present to you the guidelines. We needed something that had an impact on class size in the future and had as minimal disruption to families as possible. That's kind of the ground rules of going forward. And that's our intent. I also want to make the point that we're not asking you to do anything with this tonight. We've seen, you know, a lot of passion in the conversation, and I appreciate Mr. Franklin's mention of our meeting the other night, but I had a very, very good meeting with the parents. But I think that anytime there's that much emotion involved, it makes sense to take a deep breath, slow down, think about what we're doing, and we can revisit this in January and decide at that time if it's time to make some kind of a decision, okay? So that kind of tees up the conversation, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Knost. Mr. Brown, Mrs. Mondel, and directors, as Dr. Knost has told you, we have been looking at our projections and looking at some of those schools that are bubbling up. And so our purpose tonight is to just bring the information that we have, and that's why, very strategically, the title on here is Current Considerations. And so we're not asking for any decisions. We just want to bring you up to speed on where we are with the information that we have explored ourselves and then went out and gathered, because both that hard data and soft data is really important as we make our decisions. So Mr. Bruni, chip in any time, and here we go. All right, here's where we're headed. This is kind of going to be our guide as we go. Instead of talking about everything at once, I'd like to first give you our purpose and our priorities, which Dr. Knost mentioned just a little bit. We're going to talk about the Wild Horse and Chesterfield area, the current reality and the projections, and then we're going to move on to some current considerations for that area and go through some tables and maps. And then we're going to talk about another area, which is Stanton and Kellison, and share with you the current reality and projections there, some current considerations that we are exploring, go through the tables and maps, and then have an opportunity for you if you have further questions or discussions that you want to have here tonight. And again, we'll have plenty of time to look into any other things that come up, because we will revisit this later in January. Okay. So first of all, our purpose is to meet the needs of our students through effective and efficient use of our district buildings. And when we do that, that is exactly where we land, as Dr. Knost had just said, that we are able to keep our class sizes down, and we are able to serve all of our students to the best of our ability with those facilities that we have. So our priorities that we have kind of used as a structure to move forward are to make changes with minimal impact to family and to neighborhoods, to maintain district recommended class sizes, to ensure safe and quality learning environments, and to promote effective management of our schools so that we can deliver an optimal schedule, staffing, and organization and supervision. So let's first begin with talking a little bit about Wild Horse and Chesterfield. So we started our conversations about this in the fall, and the principals began to look at some of the various variables as we had discussions with them, and then we decided that we need to expand the conversation, and so we went to our stakeholders at Wild Horse and Chesterfield, and we just had that meeting this past Monday. And so as a result of that, here's some information that we'd like to bring forward and a consideration. Current enrollment at Wild Horse, our current enrollment is 566, and at Chesterfield 387. We strive for schools somewhere around 450 to 500. We think that that's optimal when we're scheduling and staffing and all of that. So you can see right there, a little bit low and a little bit high, but still very much within the range of all of our schools. Projected enrollments without a boundary change in 2019 and 2020 would be Wild Horse 586 and Chesterfield 353. So you see it doesn't shift a lot. And again, we have to base that on the current developments or current land that is getting ready to be developed. And one of the things that you'll see when we look at the maps in just a little while, one of the benefits of doing this now is we have a lot of undeveloped land that at some point we project might get developed. So this is only a projected enrollment out in the future as to what we know for currently purchased land that we know will get developed. So eventual growth on undeveloped vacant land and the resale of current property and homes will also yield an unknown number of students. So here is the possible option that we're currently considering for Wild Horse and for Chesterfield. And that is to grandfather all of the children, and that meaning school age, preschool, unborn, any child of existing property owners in the proposed Chesterfield boundary expansion area. And again, I'll show that map in just a minute. So the children may continue their education at their current school, including their schools in the feeder pattern. And I think that's real important. I think each of these situations are very different. The Wild Horse Chesterfield area, we have some people currently in the area that we are proposing for a boundary change that have elected to send their students to Chesterfield. And if they go to Chesterfield, that's a completely different feeder pattern that moves them up to Lafayette High School versus if they have students that they have chose to send to Wild Horse, and then they matriculate up through Marquette High School and graduate. So in this possible option, transportation for the children of the existing property owners would be included for a minimum of 10 years. And as we approach that 10-year mark, ahead of that, we would need to look at that again and see what our continued commitment to transportation could be for those students. So here's just a very simple chart. Again, the numbers seem very low for this area. In the two areas that I'm going to show you, Area A and Area B, we have 16 current students that are elementary level that live in that area. And in Area B, there are only 2. You'll notice that that's just a lot of land, but there is some new development that's going to happen on that, and the sale of that development in Area B will be as soon as February, but they have not sold any lots there yet. This is a pretty detailed chart. Yep, Bill's putting his glasses on. So probably the most important, and I'm going to point over here, the most important rows to look at are, well, the first is Wild Horse, and this is without the boundary change, and I've already mentioned those numbers. And down here we have Chesterfield without the boundary change. And then with the boundary change, this is without still in 5 years, and without. And then down at the bottom we have with the boundary change, and then with the boundary change. So that just kind of gives you a little bit more information on where we got those numbers.
Dr. Brown?
Yeah.
Do you have capacity of those buildings? Do you know what the capacity is?
I don't have the capacity with me. I know that Tim oversees the enrollment piece, and we have listed out on another chart. We didn't provide that tonight, but what rooms we have available and what all the rooms are currently being used for. So we do have all of that information that we've reviewed.
Yeah, we computed the capacity for each of the buildings, but it's really based upon the kind of program that you're going to have and what each of those rooms are going to be used for. So I think a more helpful analysis, rather than coming up with one number and the number of students, is to look at the room utilization, because you can see how many rooms are actually used for classrooms, and then there's other rooms that are used for special purposes. And if you had an influx of students, some of those additional rooms could be used if they're large enough. So we have some schedules that show each of the rooms, what their square footages are, and how they're being utilized. And I think that's a more effective way of looking at capacity versus projected.
We had that in our enrollment study, did we not? Those figures based on utilization?
You had a kind of a high and low for of a capacity number, but we didn't, and that gives you kind of a general idea. But when you're looking at you know, you may have a class that's, that just went over the line and had to break another section, and you may have a lot of room in those classrooms, but you have one that's really teetering on the border where you don't have any more room. So, I think a better way of looking at it is room by room and not by just one or two numbers that try to look at capacity. I think it's a much better approach.
I thought we did that in our enrollment study, that we had 3 different numbers we looked at.
Yeah.
So,
And
but
we
but
can-
you have that.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to provide those capacity numbers, but when it really comes down to it, you really need to look at all the rooms and what they're being used for and what you're able to, what kinds of, because you have to some of the rooms are reserved for certain programs, and as Dr. Knost mentioned that at Eureka we have preschool. Well, you'll have a lower number for capacity because you have a preschool program in there that's using up some of those classrooms. But if you choose to have the preschool program move to another school, all of a sudden the capacity goes up because you now have those room for classrooms. That's why we didn't want to just get into pigeonholing one number. We wanted to actually look at building utilization, and then we also then could consider program utilization to it, where the programs could be from one place to another.
Sure. Gives us a point of reference so we know.
Good point, Director Rogers. We'll make sure we get that detailed information to you. So the map that you have up here is a wide view of the area that we're talking about. And again, there's really 2 areas that we're looking at grabbing, and this is really a wide view. We're going to zoom in on that so that you can see a little bit more detail there. So the first section was Section A, and in Section A we have 16 elementary students, you'll remember that from the chart, who currently live there, and they are going to our schools already. The subdivision that is included in that is the Arbors Grove Court, and I'm going to point to it right over here. It is simply one street, but it is called the Arbors Grove Court. And then over here we have a little bit, we have basically 2 streets right here, and just a few kids there. That's Deep Forest Drive and Windridge Estate Court. So again, not a lot of kids. You'll notice here there's a lot of undeveloped land, and even across the street from Wild Horse, undeveloped land, not even for sale at this point in time. But again, I think the important thing that we're really trying to do is to grab some land so that we can prevent the future overpopulation of students in one school and bring them to a school that we have facilities for. And I think that that's wise to try to think as forward as we can and plan for future development, although we don't know when or if that will happen.
Jane,
Yes.
can you point to where Wild Horse is there and where Chesterfield is?
Well, not on
I
this
mean,
one,
the
but I
actual
can
school- the
right back
actual
here. Okay, now look with me here, Dr. Kinder. This is A, which was what we just enlarged that you asked me to point to it on,
Oh,
and I
you
can't.
just enlarged A?
I just enlarged A. Watch my pointer if you can over here.
Yeah, I see.
This is Chesterfield, so look how close we are to Chesterfield. And right now, this is not Chesterfield boundary. We're wanting to bring that in. It's kind of right here that I blow up on the next slide, and this is Wild Horse. Are you with me?
Where's the Wild Horse Creek Road?
It's curvy line,
It
right?
should go right.
Here.
Wait a minute.
It kind of goes down like this because then Wild Horses are here. I'm going to go to the next one and I'll show you.
Okay, okay.
Okay, do you see
I have my
that
bearing
right
now.
there? That's Wild Horse Creek Road. But then Wild Horse School is way over here.
Yeah,
And that's Kurzmount. Kurzmount Road.
okay.
Okay. And then we have Chesterfield is kind of over here, elementary. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to see. It looks just like a big blob of green. So,
Let's do that.
all right, so let's look at proposed boundary change B. This is a new subdivision, and the subdivision is Arbors at Kerrs Mill. And so this is off Kerrs Mill Road, and the developer is McBride and Sons. It's 58 acres, and it is around Church Street and Strecker. If you can see up here, oh, that's bad. All right, we're gonna start over. Sorry about that. Okay, here I am. Right here is this little circle, that's Goddard Goddard School, not elementary, but Goddard School. So this area right back in here is the subdivision that they will start selling lots, we're told, and actually the president of McBride was at our meeting the other night, so that was great to have him there and to confirm all of our information. They're going to start selling lots in February for that. The yield of students for those lots is only about 20 students, and so again, we're kind of wanting to get out in front of that so that we're not in a situation where people have already built or even bought land. All right? All right. So let's move on to Stanton and Kellison. So we know that Stanton is going to have an increase, is already getting large and has in the last few years. And Kellison, as we saw the numbers a little while ago and as we see up here again, is smaller. So current enrollment at Stanton is 549, Kellison 391. The projected enrollments without any boundary change is for Stanton 567 and Kellison actually going under that 300 mark to 288. So there's a calculation that Tim and his department figure. It's called a yield ratio, and they figure out what the yield is from each home and the number of students that will be coming from each home. So that's around 0.6. So calculating the homes and the undeveloped property, all of that information, that is how we can kind of get a pretty solid estimate based on the current subdivision of how many students will be there. So we also have a lot of land for eventual growth on undeveloped and vacant land, which we'll look at in just a moment. So at this point in time, our current possible options that we are having conversations about now, of course, we could do nothing, and there are pros and cons to not doing anything right now. And so some of those are no disruption to the boundaries and to the current future landowners. Stakeholders' input and concerns definitely would be considered in that option. Cons would be no immediate or planned impact to the current projection concerns at Stanton, and would most likely have an impact on class sizes, safety, quality of our students' learning environment, and managing just the schools in general. So that would be option A. Option B is to create a boundary line that would have minimal impact to current highly populated neighborhoods while proactively planning for future growth in undeveloped lands. So this would mean to not touch any current developing neighborhoods and to only address a boundary change on undeveloped lands. And of course that has pros and cons too. The pros are no disruption to the current landowners in phases 1, 2, and 3. No disruption to future landowners in phase 4 and 5, which are also connected. And buses would not be transporting students through phases 1, 2, and 3, and stakeholder input considered. The cons are, it does not have an immediate impact on Stanton's growth, and we would be having to mitigate some of the negative impacts of the current growth from the estates of Williams Creek at Stanton. I didn't put it on the same slide, but we also have another possible consideration or possible option here, and that is option C, to grandfather all the children, and again, meaning school-age, preschool, and unborn, of the existing property owners, so meaning if they actually own the property at this point in time, in current proposed Kellison boundary expansion area. Children may continue their education at the current school, which is Stanton, and transportation of the children of existing property owners would be included for a minimum of 10 years. And then prior to approaching that 10-year mark, we would make a commitment to reevaluate transportation to the current property owners at this point in time when we get to that, close to that 10-year mark.
Dr. Brown, just real quick as a point
Yes.
of clarification, if these property owners in these areas sell to another owner or to a new owner, those children would be then going to the other redrawn lines, correct?
I'm glad that you're thinking about it, and I think in these three options, that changes. So in this option here, the one we're looking at, what you're saying is true. So Tim owns a home next to me. We both live there. Our kids can go there. Tim gets a job somewhere else. He leaves, and somebody else moves in. Their students would go to Kellison because that would be the new boundary.
Right. Thank you.
And we've used that before, because I know it happened at Werther, at least to my family. We didn't sell, but if we had, we lived a block from Werther. If we sold, the people that moved in would be going to Baldwin, which is 2 miles versus 2,000 yards, I guess.
And we recognize that it's great to get out in front of things, and that's why we're trying to grab land in most of this. But right now, we do have an impact on Stanton because of this one subdivision is multiple phases, and it's continuing to grow. And that is the difference in the two scenarios that makes the variables a little bit different as I propose the different options to you.
Do you have a projection of
Yep.
how
Shall we go
many
there?
of these current, how many of these current property owners will sell within the next 10 years, or is that beyond the scope of?
I can tell you a projection because I've met with all of them. None of them will. They love
Unless they have to, huh?
they love their neighborhood so much, and I actually have some. I kind of want to let. We don't have a scientific projection, but it is a strong neighborhood and strong community feel in that neighborhood, and I don't think, of course, things change in lives, but I don't think there's any intent that they're going to turn over. They're happy with Stanton. They're happy with Rockwood. They're happy with where they're at. They're happy with their neighborhood. So that's the only, it's just conjecture and just speculation, but I think they would probably agree with me.
I think judging by my emails, I'd agree with that.
Is this one subdivision that we're talking about?
This is one large subdivision that has grown in phases.
Yes.
Phases 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to show that in just
Yeah.
a second, are pretty much built out. There's still some undeveloped land in those phases. And then 4 and 5 are getting ready.
How
Yeah.
old is the oldest house in that subdivision we're
Well,
talking
now,
about?
I don't know that.
Do you all know? Oldest? About 6? Okay,
7 years?
yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard.
There's some of that additional detail, and there's some things that I, once Dr. Brown's through all that, some additional things that I want to add, just based on the conversations and such. But I think that the next slides and that kind of depict the neighborhood, what makes it kind of a unique situation.
Shall we proceed? Okay, here we go. Current students in the proposed area, again, this is just simply a chart, and we've provided some of this information to you, but again, have looked at the actual facilities and how they're being used classroom by classroom, and that's really important. So this is the subdivision that we're talking about. It's the estates of Williams Creek, and this is the current students that are in this area right now as to those that are attending our schools. And again, it brings us to that yield ratio, very similar that we talked about in the last area that we're considering of 0.6. I don't know though, it sounded like from the meeting, to be honest, there was a lot of kids in those houses.
Yeah.
And new subdivisions are sometimes like that with young families. Projected enrollment, again, this is information that I've already summarized on another slide, but it kind of shows you in detail. Up at the top, we have Stanton again, the total without the boundary change currently, and the projected out. And this is just, again, developing the lots in the subdivisions that we know of, not considering if other land that we'd like to include in this gets built out. And then down below Stanton. So that's just a map that, or it's just a chart that shows that. Okay, now we're on the map. Here, it looks a little bit different than the other one. And this is the, we have two different areas here. There's one in this area and one down here. I actually like the subdivision map a little bit better here. So here is the large subdivision, the estates at Williams Creek, And you can tell a little bit by the color coding there that it is Plat 1 and 2 and 3. Those are the 3 that are built out, and then Plat 4 and Plat 5, which makes it a little bit tricky because if Plat 4 and 5 touched Kellison right now, then we could, just bring them in, but it is kind of an island if we just grab that area and leave 1, 2, and 3. So that makes another variable that's just tricky about this whole discussion. Questions and discussion?
Yeah, I'll just make a few comments about that. The part that's unique, looking at both plans up at, in the Wild Horse Chesterfield area and this area, not to discredit one over the other, but what makes the Stanton situation unique in my mind, and I think most would agree, is that it's part of an existing subdivision, which makes it difficult when you're, the best thing, if you could, this is hypothetical, if you could back up in time, go back a good time to make the boundary changes before that subdivision at Williams Creek was ever constructed in the first place, because you wouldn't have any potential division of that subdivision. So that's important to note. We don't really have that in the Chesterfield Wild Horse situation. We do have a full street that you saw that kind of stands between that big chunk of land and Chesterfield on this side, that is all existing folks, and we would do the transition situation there too. But there's not a contiguous add-on to that street or that subdivision. So it makes the two a little bit different, which makes the dynamics a little bit different. The part was mentioned about the phases of the subdivision, and in Williams Creek, I think understandably so, the neighborhood would really like us to consider their best option in their minds would be if we would just rezone the undeveloped phases, which is 4 and 5, which seems like something that's worthy of considering. The concern we have is that that ultimately would be surrounded by, it'd be a Kellison piece of area, island if you want to call it, not that that's not somewhat common in some situations, but it would be surrounded all by Stanton. So we kind of, well, I'll say, I feel for this to work, and this is what I talked to the residents about the other night, that ultimately, if we are going to do that, and again, we're not really making a recommendation tonight, and we're not asking you to select anything tonight. We want to think about all of these things, but I don't think it would be wise to only make that move, and I'll tell you mainly here's why, even more so than the island. Ultimately, there's going to be a day, whether it's me as superintendent and you all as board, it could be different folks, but at some day, if you've got that little circle segment of a subdivision that is all by itself and surrounded by all of Stanton, you're going to be revisiting this because they're going to want to be probably a part of Stanton. I mean, that's actually pretty typical for schools to deal with as boundaries get redrawn over the years. So I don't think it would solve the problem long term. And so the other thing is that it makes sense to do some sort of transition. The one other piece that we talked about when I met with the families in the transition is that some of the homes in phase 1, 2, and 3 still haven't sold. And they were more amenable to the idea if those homes would still have the option to attend Stanton for the first sale of the home. And it's not a large number, and I don't think it would have a significant impact. So if we did do this, I think that to be good partners in this decision, it would make some sense to absolutely consider that. That in that phase 1, 2, and 3, any initial homes that are definitely if they're under contract, but even if they're still for sale, that we would consider allowing them still the option to attend Stanton, and then go with the 10-year transition. And the other thing, and this is the part where I get hung up on the plan, just to be absolutely honest and clear, and why I'm not making an absolute recommendation on it at this time, is you know, we've always, in the Rockwood School District, honored limited school choice as an option for parents. That's always been something we're willing to consider. It doesn't mean it automatically happens, but it's something the district has always worked with parents on. If you do this and you do a transition, you have to stay committed to not honoring school choice as those families transition out. And you have to think that through and put your parent hat on of you know, Keith, you just talked about an example of that, but I think about when my children were little, if I was looking at a subdivision and the realtor told me that, hey, what school is this? And they said, well, the 3 families on this side of you are going to be Stanton, and 3 families on this, maybe 4 or 5 families on this side, and they're all school-age children like yours, but when you move in, you're going to go to Callison. That, you know, that hangs me up a little bit, you know. It hangs me up a lot, actually. But where I come back to is that I zoom out and I think about class sizes and I think about the overall impact, and that's where I think why we've been willing to compromise in our discussion and to try to find some happy medium is really important in this. So it's just important to note that if we did go this transition route, it does come with the need to truly do a transition over the years, over the 10 years, but I really do challenge that it may not look much different in 10 years. And then the added piece that on the homes in 1, 2, and 3 that haven't sold yet, that they would still have the option initially for Stanton.
Okay, just for my visualization purposes, because there's a lot of green there.
It's not good.
Well, I just have this question. If this development had geographically developed from a different direction, it would have been easier. I thought that's what I took from some of your comments.
Like
right, and so, but that's neither here nor there. Now, I'm guessing out there to the left as I'm looking at it, that's Plat 4, am I correct? Where's Plat 4? Okay, all right, okay.
Where's Plat 4 again?
Way to the bottom left.
I don't know which.
I feel like a cat in the living room here.
4 and 5 are right in that area.
So where's 1, 2, and 3 then?
Where's 5, Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's 5?
Okay.
The greens are light.
Right here is the dividing line where 4,
See where the color changes?
5 start.
Okay.
So this is all existing, this
Oh.
part right here and right there.
Or 4 and 5.
Streets were just poured, so it's
Right.
just streets.
So is there one way in, one way out?
The only way in and out of the subdivision is on Hillsborough Road.
Yeah.
And as one of the emails like my wife sent said, as a crow flies, we look closer to Kellison.
Right.
But we're not crows, and we have to go all the way down Hillsborough Road up to either 141 or out through Jefferson County. Yeah.
Where does Hillsborough meet 141? At that Shell station?
No.
We have to go to Little Reading, yeah, where there's, Kmart used to be on Highway 30.
It's the farthest south.
Yeah.
I have not. I'd like to go visit it, but I have no clue where to begin.
Well, I will tell you that Christy Starnes, the principal at Stanton, will give you a wonderful tour if you would like to tour out there. That is one of the first places that I started. We jumped in the car and we started driving around. So,
Dr. Starnes can show me where it's at?
yeah, she would. I'm sure she would.
Okay, Christy, thank you. Thanks, Jim.
What is the average zoning a school reaches out?
I'm sorry.
What is the average distance a school reaches out for zoning? You were
Average distance
Like
a
3
school
miles from the
reaches
school,
out,
you mean,
I
or
don't
5
know.
miles?
Yeah,
Okay,
like
well,
the average.
it's a little random.
Distance from the school, what's the average distance?
Do you have an average on that, Tim?
No.
It's different. I mean, it's
Like how you were saying, it's unbalanced throughout the
It
district.
is,
So
yeah.
is there
Yeah.
any rhyme or reason?
A lot of it is the population within that
It is.
area.
And a lot of it is, it's always an interesting study. You take any school district and you zoom out and look at the aerial view, and if it's now developed, it's hard to understand the rhyme and reason. A lot of it goes back to when you had undeveloped property and they drew things, and then as it starts to fill up, it doesn't make nearly as much sense sometimes. And a lot of times it's very specific. Backyards that back up to each other are different school districts. That's not unique to Rockwood, but I don't know what our average
I don't know.
amount of.
I don't know if you can see this, but
I can see it.
Yeah.
This is Kellison, and this is Stanton. It goes all the way around through here.
Yeah.
And that's,
It's a
Over
large
Kellison
area.
all the way out.
and largely due, I'm sure, because at one point, even more and more undeveloped land, or previously undeveloped land, that caused it to grab more students initially. It's a much wider area where Kellison looks small, but Kellison's, you know, more populated in that amount of area than all those areas, and it's changed.
See, it also looks like Stanton is not going to grow that much, 30 students, but Kellison is losing 100 students. Is that right? According to your
Plus,
projection?
there's a lot of undeveloped land
Right.
in Stanton, so they have the potential for growing a lot more.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the undeveloped can go to Kellison.
Well, that's one of the
That's what I'm
options.
talking about, yeah.
One of the options is that you just consider grabbing, and it would be interesting drawings. We
Yeah, I think what you'd have
discussed
is
that.
you'd have Kellison, you'd have an area around, of Stanton right around it, and then you'd break, and then you'd have Kellison again, if you wanted to do that.
But is it as big a deal when it's a whole neighborhood that goes to, right?
Yeah,
You understand what I'm
yeah,
trying to say?
I'm with you. That's what I was saying
I thought you were
earlier.
like going against it, like, do you
No.
understand what I'm doing?
No.
Yeah. To me, it would be if a whole neighborhood, so keep all Williams Creek going to, and even if down here is Kellison, up here Stanton, if the whole neighborhood is going,
Right.
that would make more sense.
That's ideal, and again, just to give you the, the view of how we find ourselves, right in the middle of this and trying to make good decisions and good recommendations, because, again, we've said, Tim used the phrase one day, and I thought it was great, we can roll the dice on this. I mean, there's not a problem with that, but we do, while it doesn't look like a lot of numbers, there's a lot of undeveloped land, and those numbers are higher. So we do have to realize that there's some potential within a couple of years for us to not be able to support our own class sizes at at Stanton, because they're already up there. So that's why, otherwise, why would we, there's too much pain in this discussion, just why I don't think about it. That's the only reason why it's still on the table, but also why we're trying to be so careful in the minimal disruption and the 10-year mark and accepting some of the suggestions that have came forth from the neighbors there. So those are all things that we need to think about, and now you understand, too much to think about in one evening and too much to make any discussion with in one evening. I think it makes sense to continue. And also, we're still getting feedback from we're still trying to get more feedback from the Chesterfield Wild Horse area. We want to make sure that those folks have plenty of time to get more in. I have not had an opportunity to go meet with the group up there. We haven't really had the need. They haven't.
No, I checked with the two principals, and I'd like to say thank you to our 4 principals that are here tonight.
Thank you.
And their collaboration and their insight, even before we went out to parents, because those were great discussions. But I have checked with both of those principals, and they've gotten some feedback. It hasn't been feedback that has come to you. It's been thanks for meeting with us, that kind of thing. But again, we want to give that a little bit of time, because everyone cannot always come out on the night that you have the meeting. So we want to give them time and a weekend when they see their neighbors to have those discussions, if they haven't already.
And just to reinforce it, the two situations are much different, so
Yeah.
so you shouldn't engage one against the other because they're so much different.
The other thing I'd like to say that I think should be apparent from all this evening is that these are not frivolous and easy decisions, and we don't take and consider them in that way. We take into consideration, like Dr. Canos said, young children that are going to go different directions and so forth. So everybody, if we had it the easy way, I prefer that. It doesn't seem, since the time I've been on the board, there's been very many decisions that rolled our way that were easy. I just want everybody to know that we are taking these decisions seriously, and we're looking at every option, trying to exhaust to come up with what we think is the very best thing to do. And so bear with us, and we'll continue to do that. Dr. Canos, I know, has been agonizing over this, and we as board members, as we receive emails, we do read those, and we are sensitive. Like you say, I projected if this were my son or daughter, I would have a lot of the same sentiments that I'm hearing expressed to us as board members. All right. Any other questions? And I agree with the slide now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, we get to move into another fun project. Capital Projects Funding Report. Mr. Rooney will be joined by Mr. Friend, and Dr. Knost is going to have some comments here. Appreciate it.
So as they get settled in, same thing, I kind of want to set this up a little bit, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
At an earlier board meeting, we presented, these two gentlemen presented the annual report on our facilities study, which consisted of a lot of leftover things from the last number of years, because a lot of these things have not been addressed, and it just continues to grow. It was presented to the board, and it identified needs of over $170 million in cycle maintenance and capital projects. And many of those needs, again, have been on hold for many years due to budget constraints, budget challenges, and some failed efforts at ballot measures. And even in recent years, really the effort is been to rob the operations side of the budget to take care of some of the capital needs, some of the facility needs. And we're to a point where that really can't happen anymore unless we're willing to compromise the integrity of our educational program. And not that it hasn't done that in the past, but I think it's done that at a minimal amount. And we're at a time where the needs are so great that you know, I want to remind everybody of this too, because I'm very proud of this effort, and I'm proud of my team for their efforts. The preliminary budget that we presented to you was a plan for a balanced budget, but balanced budgets mean there are sacrifices in what you do, and a lot of what's being sacrificed are our facility and our capital needs. So that's a real important piece, but we feel that stewardship is important to our community. After we presented the initial capital projects report, I was charged with bringing back a plan for the funding of these things. And that's really what's going to be presented tonight. But I want to be clear, after some calls that I received, this is not a presentation about a specific ballot issue tonight. This is more the presentation about the mechanics of how we could, over time, handle funding the needs of our capital needs and our facility needs. So, and you'll see a lot of that. It does talk about ballot measures, but I think some people thought that maybe tonight we were presenting an actual ballot issue, and that's not what we're doing. It was asked. Ms. Rogers asked me last time if any of this was a prelude to a ballot issue, and I think my response was that, in essence, because of our needs, all of these conversations are a prelude to a ballot issue. That doesn't define when that is or what that is, but we shouldn't shy away from the fact that ultimately it's inevitable that that's what we'll need. So basically, we're going to present some options and a concept, and then I'll come back a little later and suggest where the next level of work needs to be. So I'll turn it over to.
I guess I apologize in advance. I've got several charts and graphs in here that I'll try to go through, but I thought in order for you to totally understand the different funding mechanisms that those charts might help. The first few slides are just kind of a review. As we mentioned last time, we've had a list of capital projects that's been developed over a long period of time, and it gets updated each year as we go through on a capital review, and then we come to the board and kind of give you an idea of what projects are out there. So I give you this list. The first part of this is on cycle maintenance, and we're trying to make the differentiation between cycle maintenance and specific projects. Because cycle maintenance, what we're trying to recognize is there are certain building components that have useful life, and we can expect that we're going to have to replace them on a regular cycle. And so what we're trying to do is just do the math and say we've got so many million square feet of roofing, for example. We know how long an average roof is supposed to last. We know what the replacement cost is. So we better have that much money in the budget in order to take care of that when the estimated useful life is up. Now, with that being said, we would never get to the point where if a roof is in perfectly good condition that we would go ahead and replace it when we have another one that maybe didn't last as long as it should have. Every year when we go through the calculus, we'll then say what is the worst roof, what is the worst parking lot, those kind of things. But cycle maintenance is something that if you go through the math on all of those areas, on each one of those infrastructure components, you can then kind of identify how much you need every year just to keep and maintain the current infrastructure. And then in addition to that, on the next slide, on next several slides, we have specific projects at each of the schools. And so we went through a little bit of that last time, so I won't spend time right now to go over that, but if you have any questions, I'd be glad to do that. So on funding options, then we've got several options. Again, we have the do nothing option, and that's kind of what we've been doing since 2010, except that we've used fund balances, and we've picked off some of the most critical projects and burned down the fund balances. And at the end of this year, we anticipate being at the 22%. So that's the board target for fund balance, and so that's why what Dr. Cano said, you know, that option is kind of drying up. So in the short run, that means we'd be doing a fix on failure. We'd have to be taking that out of our fund balances, and that would then burn those down even further than what the board target is. In the long term, if we don't at least let's see, we've had a source of capital funding, we had a source of operational funding. Since 2010, we haven't had the capital funding. If you just say, well, let's do away with that capital funding and let's just make that operating budget stretch to include capital, you're looking at about $17 million you're going to have to get out of the operations. And Dr. Knost mentioned that we just balance the budget, but to go in and carve out $17 million a year seems a little bit unrealistic, and that then wouldn't address any of the special projects that we have. So the do nothing option is always an option, but it doesn't seem like a very viable one. During the community engagement, one of the things that I tried to stress was that we ought to be looking at a dedicated building fund tax rate, and I'll get into that a little bit more. It does require a vote of the people to increase the tax rate, but what we would propose doing, and I'll get more into this in the slideshow here, is that as this goes up, the debt service goes down. So it'd still be a no new tax increase. And that's one that I kind of favor, and I'll kind of give you some of the information as to what my reason is for that. Option C, we can continue with what we're doing right now, or what we have been doing, and that's issue bonds. And our current debt service levy could support this. So the option B and C, we're talking about no new tax. We're essentially talking about maintaining the current tax rate. It's not, although the mechanics of the first one is that you have to increase the tax rate with building fund, the debt service come down at the same time, so it'd be a zero effect. The last one is lease purchase, and the lease purchase has to be paid from your operating funds, but it could be used for things like the turf fields, where we have as we showed last time, there is an operational savings, about $80,000 each year, and that could help pay toward that lease payment. On a 10-year lease, that'd be about $375,000. If you go to a 15-year lease, you're down around $275,000. There's some other things that you could apply to that if you wanted. In the facilities rental, you could take some of the indirect costs of facilities rental and apply those costs, maybe up to $126,000. Now, if the revenue didn't generate that, though, you'd have to probably consider adjusting the rates for the rentals in order to do that. But that'd be another source of revenue that you could, if you chose to go lease purchase on something like the turf fields, you could do that and bring in some additional dollars.
Can I ask a question about that? So if you lease those fields, then you're not putting out $3.3 million or whatever, where I don't know what the numbers are, to purchase those for whatever it is. You would lease them for 10, 15 years.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
It's essentially financing though. I mean, it's
Right.
called a lease purchase, but what you're doing is you're borrowing money from the bank and you're paying it back over a 10
So
year.
you're paying interest on that,
Yes,
obviously. Is that gonna be higher than if you did a bond issue or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, you'd be a little bit higher.
Significantly higher?
It depends on how you place it, you know, and it depends on what certain banks have in their portfolios. Sometimes they'll give you a really good deal on it. So it all depends on what the interest rate environment is at the time you do it.
But you didn't hesitate to say it's more.
Yes,
It's
yeah, it'd
definitely-
be a little bit more.
okay.
It's more, and this really is only on there, I think the only way we would consider this, because as we've presented and tried to make it very clear that we are spending more taxpayer dollars maintaining our traditional grass fields than we would be if we had turf. So I think that sets that part aside. I agree with the gentleman earlier. It doesn't mean that that's the absolute priority over everything else. I think there are other things that are definitely more of a priority, but we need to realize that that's one that while it costs money to do it, we're spending taxpayer dollars not to do it, more in excess of what we would be. So the lease purchase really, the only reason Tim and I have even discussed that is if we would do nothing in the way of ballot issues going forward to take care of all of our other, you know, this is tiny compared to all of those capital facility needs. So that's just an option that we would consider as a way to address good stewardship of taxpayer dollars if we're not going to do anything else. That's really the only reason it's on there. It's
And you've
smaller.
done that before. You did that on the lighting project. And in fact, we're still paying off those lease purchase bonds. And in fact, that's another opportunity that in 2018, when those are paid off, that's $73,000 a year that you're paying toward that you could apply to something like this if you chose to. Or if not, then it'll just go into it'll free up money in the operating funds.
So that was my point. We're losing $80,000 a year, but perhaps with the interest thrown on there, it would be maybe not almost worth it to do it that way.
It wouldn't be that significant.
Not that significant, okay.
Yeah, the $80,000 included the refreshing
I know
of the
we're paying
facility.
interest on that. Yeah, okay.
Tim, what project, what bond did you say the lighting project, is that what you said?
Yes, the lighting.
Okay,
project.
lighting, okay, I couldn't understand.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this is one of the first graphs. First of all, if you maybe the easiest way of looking at this, if you think of your home mortgage and every year you have to pay off a certain amount. The one thing different about bond issues is that the payments are not equal payments. On a home mortgage, you'd have equal monthly payments. Bond issues, you can layer that principal and interest in any one of those years. If you look at the line that's on the top, that's how much revenue is currently going into that fund. It's on 68 cents. The reason you're seeing an upward slope on that is over time, except for what happened from 2007 forward. We've always seen some increases in assessed valuation. So Piper Jaffray put in a very modest increase in the assessed valuation over time. So the line, if you look at the distance between the line and the top of the bar, that's available authority. In other words, we have the revenue according to the line, and you have the expense according to the bar chart. So that's why you can do either one of these approaches without a tax increase. On the vertical axis, you'll see the total dollar amount. So you can see in 2013-14, we actually exceeded the line, and the way that was we were able to do that is that we ended up having balances that were being burned down during that time. So the combination of the revenue plus the balances allow you to meet those debt service obligations.
And Tim, apologize, I'm not trying to bog us down, but I want to clarify something. I believe we got into a similar situation a few years ago, long before I was on the board. And I noticed Mr. Kriegshauser's looking up at me because I think he told me at one time there was a proposal to do exactly what you're kind of talking about tonight. And so the taxpayer wouldn't have realized any increase in taxes, but we would have been able to put more into our capital funding by doing the very same thing and we didn't. And that helped put us in the position we're in today. Am I correct in saying it that way?
Well, I don't know about the history, but yeah, I don't know if I could really address that. By doing the bond issue, and I'll kind of get to this in a little bit more in the presentation, but there's a purpose for bond issues and there's a purpose for doing operating levies. And the purpose for bond issue, I mean, the major purpose for the bond issues is if you have a lot of infrastructure needs and you're like a growing district and you need to build new buildings and those kind of things, bond issues are very good for those because you can't afford to pay those off in 1 year. Where you have a fixed amount that you need to pay every year on these cycle maintenance projects, it doesn't, it's probably better, a better funding mechanism for that is to have a dedicated source of revenue so that when you have that expense, you have the revenue there. You don't want to borrow the money to do that and then pay that back in the future because then you have those interest costs. So I think depending on where you are in the growth cycle, you may choose to do bonds. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just thinking in Rockwood's situation where we are right now, that you're better off under a scenario where you have a dedicated levy. Does that kind of answer?
Yep, that's exactly what I was talking about.
Okay, and I've got some assumptions in here to kind of explain this, the following slides. In order to do that, I wanted to show you first what the past bond issues have been, and then what's included in the illustration. And you'll see that there was one issue in 2006, there was another issue in 2008, and then you see 3 series in 2010. The only reason you have 3 series is because that's when the federal stimulus money came in, and they had you could issue just normal general obligation bonds, or you could or you have these what they call QSABs or BABs, where the federal government was paying part of the interest for those bonds. But essentially, you could add those 3 together. That was your bond issue. You just try to take advantage of some federal subsidies. So over those years, over those 6 years, you had $169.4 million for the bond issue. And if you divide that by the 6 years of construction, that's $28.2 million.
Tim, wasn't that essentially refinancing those bonds in a roundabout way to a lower interest rate?
Not this. We did do some refundings as well.
We did do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just new money issues. Okay, then down below, that's illustration. So I just said, what if we issued bonds in those denominations over those years? And I'll explain to you why I picked those number of years. And so about $141 million. So over a 9-year construction period, this proposal would be about 15.6. So it's much smaller than what we've done in the past. The dollar amount used in this illustration funds most of what we showed as special projects on the district list and makes substantial progress toward the ongoing cycle cost. So I just showed you on the last slide that it's much less than what we did on a per year basis than in the past, but it accomplishes a lot because we were able to get most of the special projects off the list, and we're also doing a lot in the cycle maintenance as well. And I mentioned to you that there's also modest assessed valuation increases. So option B, fund the capital needs with the dedicated levy. And it'll take about a 54-cent tax rate to fund the annual cycle maintenance, that's $17 million. And, but based upon the debt repayment schedule, the debt service rate cannot be lowered by that amount for 9 years. And the reason for that is it's kind of like, you know, when you're taking out debt, you know, you want to get on a different program instead of borrowing and then paying it back in the future. You're trying to get on a pay-as-you-go. So you got to pay the old debt off and then start. So the year you do it, you're somewhat restricted. So you look at the amount from that chart before where we have the amounts that are scheduled out. You really can't drop the tax rate, the debt service rate for those outstanding bonds for 9 years. So what we're talking about here is a transition plan. So you can't get there overnight, but you can get there over a period of time.
Can I just clarify, just so everybody is really clear, the other option, which we're not proposing or suggesting, the goal in our conversation has been an effort that would address these significant needs in ways that does not impact the current tax rate. It does not take the current tax rate higher. Of course, you could always just say, well, we're going to do a 54-cent tax levy at any point in time, but that would be an increase to the tax rate.
That's right.
Versus, so the only way we can get that in a neutral mode is to wait 9 years, to let the deck, the way it's structured, it would take us 9 years to be able to do that plan. So therein lies the concept.
Yeah,
of
that's a good
transition.
point, because you could, as you said, you could do 54 cents right now. It would be an increase in the rate, but then if you're not issuing new debt, that debt service fund's going to go down, but it's not going to go down at the same time. So you would be able to draw down that 54 cents in the future as well. So it's kind of a matter of timing. We just thought it might be easier to sell an issue where you have one going up and while the other one's going down, so you don't have to have a temporary tax rate increase. So by funding the cycle maintenance projects with a dedicated tax rate, the district would not need to borrow the funds for the capital projects. That's a big advantage. With a dedicated source of annual funding, the district can schedule projects for a number of years. I've heard a lot from the community saying, well, my project never gets on there. How will I ever know if my project is going to ever get funded? And so if you do a 10-year cycle, and then they'll kind of know what year they'll be on there. Now, some have said, well, even under bond issues, we've done 10-year planning horizons. But the problem is you don't have the funding mechanism behind that, because if you're doing 2-year bond issues, you may be in year 3 through 10, but you don't know by the time you do another bond issue, everything's changed again. Where you have a dedicated source of funding, you know when to expect your project to be done. And the other thing is, as the assessed valuation increases, it can rise up to the consumer price index and help offset the cost of rising cost of construction. Okay, so this one's a little bit complicated, but this is, as you can see at the top, the 68-cent levy that would support that debt. If you look at the blue bars, that's the current outstanding debt. And so what we're talking about is if we want to transition into this kind of a program, what we need, if you're willing to not have capital for a long period, or for the 9 years, you can just move right into this. But we have some pressing capital needs, and so what we're talking about is issuing some debt until you get to the ninth year, when you're then able to get over into a dedicated levy in the building fund. So if you look at the red and the green bars, that's how you could layer in the debt from the illustration that I mentioned earlier, and you could fill in those areas up for the first 9 to 10 years, and then schedule those out for all those out years, and it'll all be below that 14 cents except for that 1 year. So if you look at then the 68 cents down to the 14 cents, that's the 54 cents that you could transfer over to the building fund levy. Now there is a blip in the 2026-27 year, and that again is related to the stimulus program. There was some debt that the federal government said that they would pay for the entire interest on, and when it was issued, they decided to go ahead and take it out to the longest period of time. And so that blue bar in 26-27 is a scheduled payment, and of course you'd have to pay the principal and interest on, or I'm sorry, the interest on those two outstanding debts. So that's why it's up, and you'll notice that the bar, the longest bar, or the longer bar is the last one there. It's a little bit short, so it's building up fund balance, so you pay that one off. So what you can do is you could schedule this such that you could have that drop off in year 10 from 68 cents to 14 cents, and then use that for your building fund, and you could still issue some debt in the interim 9 years. So here's how it would work. You have a 68-cent levy. You then commencing in 2024-25, that levy would go down to 14, so you free up 54 cents in the debt service fund. You increase the building fund tax rate at that time. Again, that takes a vote of the people. And so if you add those two together, you get 0, so no change in the tax rate. You then take the $3.2 billion worth of assessed valuation of the district times the new 54-cent levy times the current collection rate, and you get 17 million. So that's how, from that point forward, then you would have this dedicated source of revenue that would go on, And again, all the benefits of no interest, the longer planning cycle, all those things you'd be able to enjoy.
It's per year, reoccurring
Right.
income.
And you're going to get, I might mention here later, but there's, right now in the debt service fund, we pay 25 cents out of every dollar for interest. And that's low because the federal government has been subsidizing us. It's been up to around 40%. Now that doesn't, some people misinterpret that and they say that that's the interest rate that we're paying on the bonds. It's not. If you think of get, your home mortgage again, where if you look at for any given payment, how much is going to interest and how much is going to principal, in the early years you have a large amount that's going to interest and a small amount that's going to principal. Right now on average it's between 25 to 40%. So just think if you were able to go into this kind of a program, then dollar for dollar goes to projects. You don't have to pay interest anymore, but it'll take you a transition period to get there. So option C, fund capital needs with ongoing bond issues. If we're going to do that, we recommend that you don't do anything less than a 3-year period. And again, the additional bond issues, if you went this route, could be paid from the current debt service levy. So this would be an example of what would happen if you continued to do bond issues. You could just keep layering in additional debt up to the 68 cents. So as you get closer to the 27, 28, you got needs again, so you'll just keep filling in. The disadvantage of that, though, of course, is you're paying principal and interest for those. So here's our recommendation. And typically when you make a recommendation, you'd only be looking at the next bond issue, but we're trying to transition from one method of financing capital to another. So we have to somehow bridge those 9 years. So we're suggesting that we have a bond issue of approximately $60 million, covering a 4-year construction period, and include all of the current safety items. So everything that's on that list. The only exception to that is there's some cycle maintenance things that are that we've labeled as safety because because as you do cycle maintenance, let's say you've got cracks in your asphalt, you've got problems with your floors, those kind of things. Those can become safety issues. But for all the special projects, we would end up doing all the safety components with that first bond issue. And then on bond issue 2, we didn't put a whole lot of discussion into that because we've got a lot of time to think about what would be in there. So the details would be determined later. But we're only presenting it here to address the remaining transition period. It could be 1 or 2 issues as determined at that time. Approximately $81 million over the remaining 5 years of the construction period. And it would complete most of the remaining special projects and on the capital list and the cycle maintenance. So again, you'd be getting a lot of bang for your buck. So that by the time you transitioned into a fixed levy, you would then be primarily into a situation where you're just trying to do cycle maintenance, and you'd have a budget that would pay for the cycle maintenance.
And just so we're clear, so the concept of bond issue 1 would roughly be a 4-year issue. We would with that 60 million, we would address things that would cover us for 4 years. The second one would be 5 years, or it could potentially decision be made where that could be busted up into 2. But that would be 5 years, and then that would take us to the 9-year mark, where we could then fully transition to the new plan to have the annual revenue stream.
On bond issue 1 and bond issue 2, is it front-end loaded with these special projects? You do them early and then just do safety, or is it spread out equally throughout the 4 years?
We haven't really decided that yet.
Right.
That was my point earlier, that the only comment Tim made is that we're confident obviously safety should always be a priority. So we're confident that the safety needs minus the safety pieces that are in cycle maintenance would fit within that 60 million. We know that much. We know that the safety pieces would fit comfortably in that 60 million. The rest of the structure has to do with how the debt structure is to keep us moving towards that transition.
Yeah, and many of the projects have been vetted by past bond issues, and as part of the CSIP review, I do have an objective in there that talks about coming up with the capital needs of the district, looking at DESI standards, and then trying to find a funding mechanism for that. So if the board chooses to move forward, I could use that group to kind of help us vet whatever kind of an issue that we might want to move forward with.
Okay, if I missed this, I'm sorry, but it's almost my bedtime. Okay, so after the 9 years, then how, I mean, are you taking into consideration special projects and cycle maintenance? Is that, or how, you think you'd have money for both of those?
Yeah, between bond issue 1 and 2, we would be able to do the
But I'm
vast
saying
majority.
when that's over,
Which
I
means
mean, in
new-
10 years' time, we're not gonna have new special projects?
Oh, you may, and
mean, and then-
that's one of the things that as we were looking at some of the priorities in the budget, some of the cycle maintenance is more important than other parts of the cycle maintenance, and you may choose to do fewer cycle maintenance projects and more special projects during that period of time, whatever the priority is at the time.
It's really, the important thing to think about that is it's a luxury we haven't had. I mean, that's $17 million per year in the budget that's dedicated to what we need to do. And you can offset this on a year where you've got, you know, a significant project need. But that's not necessarily going to fund some, you know, some big campaign down the road where we have to build a new school or something like that.
Keep in mind, you still have the 14 cents out there too. And 10 years down the road, then the debt's going to be paid off, and then you're going to have that 14 cents. So you'd still have the ability to do some bonds. But,
Gotcha.
and then I just wanted to mention something about the interest costs, because if you're going to issue interim debt through bond issues, and you're going to spread that out a little bit further so you keep your 14 cents down, then some could argue, well, you're going to have higher interest costs for that interim debt. Well, first of all, the interest rate environment is so low, and this is a graph of where AAA rated debt is, and as you can see where we are right now, it's low relative to other times. And it's an investment that you're making so you don't have to pay interest in the future. So if you're able to get low interest debt now, and just in order to get you through the gap, and then from that point forward, if you don't issue any more bond issues, everything is interest free. It's much better economically to go ahead and transition into that different method. And then the last thing I have is just potential election dates. This next year in 2015, there's only one date where you can where the required percentage is 57.14%. Otherwise, it's 2/3. And then if you wait another year, then you can have an election either in April, August, or November. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that with regard to projects, unless you free up some funding to do some, you know, once you pick some projects and you do your architect selection and you do your drawings and you get them out for bid and all those kind of things, typically after an election, the majority of your work's going to be some 18 months later, because after April and you've got all those things to do and you're going to try to hit a short summer session, you can probably, so I guess you don't want to expect that the first summer after whatever bond issue you might choose, you can start doing the work. There will be some projects, and Chris could talk to this better than me, but there will be some that you might be able to do in the summer, but the majority of them you're going to have to wait for another year unless you do some method of advance, you know, do some of the things in advance, like selecting the architect and getting your bid specs together and all those kind of things, which takes money.
If we are successful in passing a bond issue, the first summer would be very soft. We've really been in neutral as far as planning these major projects since 2010, and we've been waiting for funding, so it does take quite a bit of time. You know, as an example, the Eureka High locker rooms, that's a concept that's out there, but it has not been designed. So to expect that you pass a bond issue in April and a shovel's in the ground a couple weeks later, that's not realistic. The first summer would more than likely be some of these cycle projects, some flooring stuff, some HVAC. You wouldn't see the big construction projects hit until the following summer.
Okay. And if it is not successful, do we have a plan?
If
it doesn't pass again?
No, I mean, we're talking a significant amount of money, and you know, at some point in time, costs are going to continue to go up. In a lot of the special projects just would go by the wayside. A lot of the things that some of the gentlemen talked about tonight, those kinds of things would go by the wayside. And the other things, when we had needs, safety needs, it would end up, you know, we'd have to consider our reserves. with further cutting in, which we're already at the, what policy suggests that percentage should be, or we're cutting even further into just our operating costs, which means the needs inside the classroom are impacted. So at some point in time, that revenue stream, the ability to have more money to do these things is necessary.
There's a related point on the next slide. I already mentioned about, there's really a growing district that's having to build a lot of infrastructure. Bond issues are really good, and I already kind of mentioned all that, and that's on this slide. But down toward the bottom of the slide, it's talking about if you reinstate a capital plan, what that does for your operations. First of all, you might recall that that on the budget, although we balanced, we are still trying to do about $2 million worth of capital needs. If we were able to have a bond issue, then we would not have that $2 million in the operating budget, and that then provides a surplus in that fund that could help us into the future as we continue to try to balance our budget. That's one. The other thing is there are projects included in our list that would bring down utility costs, and to the extent that we could start doing those, we could also generate some operational savings. So if capital doesn't just stand on its own, it has an effect on the operating budget, a very positive effect on the operating budget.
At the risk of getting groaned at, your election date in November of 2016, it's the 8th. Only reason I know that, I just taught it in government.
Oh, did he?
It's the first Tuesday following the first Monday, so it can't ever be on the first. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
I don't want one of my SLU students seeing this and then telling me that I don't know my own material.
Yeah.
So, to kind of recap all of that, the idea and the charge was to come back with a plan of how we would fund all of those needs that have been growing and building and previously vetted through community engagement and added to through our own process based on needs, while maintaining a balanced budget, while maintaining our reserves where they need to be, and while not going to the taxpayers and asking for tax rate increases from the current tax rate. So this is a plan to try to get to the dedicated levy, which is 9 years out, but in the meantime, we could do bond issues and take care of a lot of those needs along the way until we get there, and significantly so. We think that can be vetted in a way for it to be very ample for our needs, and not where we'd be selling something short. It just divides out nicely. And the timing of it, that's something that the board has to consider, reiterate. Obviously, if you would be looking at something April of 2015, you have to realize that as Chris referred to them as it'd be soft that first summer, so we'd really be talking about the summer of 2016 where the bigger chunk of the projects will be doing. And if we wait until April of 2016, you're talking about the summer of 2017 before the bigger chunk of those projects are going. So those are just things to consider as we go away tonight. And I would suggest, of course, the board can direct us, direct me, however you feel that you need to, but I would suggest that a logical next step would be to charge me and my team with coming back with what the specifics of what a $60 million bond would look like. What would we, we'd use the CSIP team and further vet that out and point out those safety pieces and what else would make up that $60 million bond that we would potentially float at some time. And the board, again, can think about that, and we can discuss it again. That would be my recommendation for the next charge for the administration.
I'd like to add, some of you may remember when I first got into the board, I talked about a dedicated levy to maintenance. Some of the staff and some of the board members that were around, and Bill as well. That's how it's done in most of the rest of the world, and you don't have your general maintenance on a bond that you run every 2 years. So I'm glad to see that we're all having this discussion now. Do you have any type of idea when you would start to convert that debt service levy what portion towards the operating levy? Do you have any, I don't recall seeing that. When would you start to make that transition?
I think it's in that 24, 25 year. I mean, there's hybrid approaches. You know, you could go out and ask the voters for the 54 cents and then just not implement it until those things, but it gets a lot more complicated there to kind of explain that balance. So what we were trying to do is at the end of that 9 years, it would just fall off and then down to the 14 cents, and that's when you'd make the change.
I think last summer we had talked about, summer of 13, I guess, talked about moving it in increments over to the operating side. Is that, you still want to push it out to one lump sum in
I think it's
20,
easier.
24?
I think it's easier for the public to understand when it comes in one lump sum, because otherwise you either have to do a series of levy election issues, increases in the levy election, or you need to do the whole thing, and then you have to say, but trust me that we will roll back the debt service levy at the same point. And so I think it's easier to just do the whole thing at once and just say, you know, the debt service levy is going to go down by this, and the building fund's going to go up by that, and it's going to be zero.
I think one of your criticisms would be, well, that's what you've been saying every year for, you know, X many years. How, you know, kind of your naysayers, how are you going to say we will absolutely in 2024-ish convert this? How do we assure folks of that?
Yeah, there's no
way. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's.
Yeah, you really can, because it's future boards, and but I think that, I don't know, to some degree that obviously applies to every decision, a lot of decisions that are made by current boards, that they're dependent upon future boards. And in some cases, future boards may, based upon their constituents, intend it to go in a different direction. So you kind of have to let that process go. But I hope that it carries some weight with the public, that the intent is to be good stewards. The intent is to get us to that concept of a dedicated levy, but in a way that we don't have to go out and hit them in the pocketbook for great changes to their current tax rate. It's exactly the opposite. It doesn't affect the current tax
And we'd be
rate.
making interim steps that would allow that opportunity to be made. If you don't do the pre-planning, you'll get there and you won't be able to do it then either. But if that's the board's charge now, then it'll be prime. And why a board at that time may not want to do it. I mean, when everything's ready to go and it's no interest costs and all that kind of stuff.
It sure sets it up. It sure sets it up nicely. And you know, my message, really, the part about stewardship to our taxpayers is that we owe our taxpayers stewardship, and you know, we need to be accountable for that stewardship, and that message needs to be loud and clear to our taxpayers. And this, I think, is a very effective way to demonstrate that stewardship. You know, starting by presenting a responsible preliminary budget that's balanced is something they need to see in stewardship. And this allows us, you know, a bona fide plan with a lot of thought put into it, where we're not going out and trying to hit them in the pocketbooks to get things done. But the beauty of it is it does give us a lot of power to get, over time, our needs taken care of and addressed, and by relatively maintaining where we currently are. That's been the intent of it, and it's probably the softest approach to doing both. You know, moving forward with the heavy needs that we have, and not going out after some huge ballot issue. It's very palatable, I think. You know, the concept of a $60 million bond that does not raise the current tax rate, and it's an opportunity for us to show stewardship, get a lot of things taken care of in the district, including all the safety issues that we have and I have concerns about. So that's really how it's designed. Now we're just asking the board to think about that, and again, if you desire, you can charge me with asking my team to further vet what we have and show you what that $60 million bond would look like.
Could you come back with that as soon as the next board meeting?
Okay. Can we also?
I think you would have to.
Can we also ask your team to vet how you structure a campaign for a bond issue like this. Is it any different than the other ones? Or do you have to go in and explain it differently? I'm curious how this would work.
I think we have to, we owe it to the taxpayers for those that want to understand how it fits into the structure over time. So that's definitely in the information that we share, just in the factual information that we share, not really emotional in any way, just the factual information. But ultimately, what it comes down to is it's initially, whenever that would be, whether it be any one of those dates on there, initially, you'd be looking at a $60 million bond issue that does not raise the current tax rate.
But in the past, there've always been parts in there for each of the quadrants, each of the schools, to ensure that they at least have something. Now, is that still a guarantee, or are you just going to put so much early on that it doesn't guarantee that every school's going to get something?
Well, that's one of the beauty.
How that works.
That's kind of the beauty of the cycle maintenance, because that affects every one of the schools. So for all of that portion, then our intent is to find the projects that are the worst. Now, when it all comes down to it, we may not know. We may not be able to identify that goes into this segment or this segment. We're going to have to look and see what the worst case is at that point. Or we can structure the bond issues. We can. That's one of the things when we bring it back. We can talk about some of those issues as to whether we need to have some more in one area or the other.
I think that when we do structure it, and again, I recommend, and I would recommend to Tim and the CSIP team, and I would recommend to you all that we should put a priority on all the identified safety pieces. I think that's just common sense. And but what we can do, we have the ability to explain the plan. That if somebody comes back and says, what this was in your needs, because this has really given us the opportunity to pretty much address all the needs that we have going forward, eventually through the cycle maintenance. So we have to vet that in a way that says, that's going to be addressed, but it may not be addressed for a while. And if that continuum of what's more of a need, and at what point in time does it become a need, because some of those things are down the road a bit.
Right. And Dr. Kinder, the project list that we have, a lot of these special projects that are on this list are stuff that we just, quite frankly, didn't get to with prior bond issues. But as Tim said, the cycle maintenance does reach out and it touches the entire district. There's systems of various ages throughout the district that people would be seeing improvements in their schools throughout the district. As far as the special projects go, that list is pretty much already laid out for us. There's a few new items that have come up in the last couple of years, but really it's stuff that people are familiar with, that they've seen before, and that they've been waiting on. We just haven't had the funding to do it.
Does that also mean that if we would run something like this and it passes, then that money we've been taking out of the operational budget to do these things, does that stay in the other part of the operational budget for some other pieces? Such as, you've taken a lot of money in the last couple of years to fund technology because there was no bond issue. Are you funded? Would that move back to the bond issue so you could use that other money?
A little bit more. There's two steps to that. I guess the first one is that when we did that, then we actually deficit spent. So, but in the budget that we're planning for next year, we have $2 million in capital needs for that. So we could take that out and put it in the bond issue. And so you would be $2 million better in the operational fund going forward.
Yeah, I think I answered my question, that you would shift a lot of those stuff to
going
the bond
forward,
issue.
but not going back to recapture, but going forward.
Going forward.
For timing, in order to have that option, we do need to see what the structure of that would look like, and it has to be pretty fast.
Right.
But I think just as important to that is I would like to see something put together and call it the 9-year plan or something. But just as important, this isn't just another bond issue. This is a plan to change how we're financing the district, and to be a more responsible use of taxpayers' money. That 9-year plan, and if you got to a point 9 years in the future, and you've got 54 cents of excess debt service levy, yes, we could do that. The board would reduce that because we don't have that kind of debt anymore. In addition, at that point is when you would ask for the increase of a 54-cent operating levy. What board wouldn't do that?
Right.
You're getting to a point where a future board could do anything, yet they wouldn't intentionally shoot themselves in the foot. Of course you would do that.
Right.
But I think the description of that plan, the identification of what those steps would have to be and what the benefits to the district would be is going to be just as important important as what's in that bond issue.
Absolutely.
It's not just another bond issue.
Well, this moves us in, excuse me, this moves us in a direction that I remember, I think you just mentioned that, Ms. Rogers, that one of the very first candidate forums that we had, one of the questions that was brought up was, we were putting bond issue into maintenance, and we wanted to move away from that into capital projects and use our money more wisely. And I think this puts us on with a plan that's going to do exactly what we thought should have been done a long time ago.
And just, and what we really need to make sure people are educated on, which I think goes to Mr. Dole's point, is that it takes 9 years unless we want to raise the current tax rate. That's the concept. So, somebody could be critical and say, well, that's a great idea, but do it now. Don't. Well, we could, and we could do that, and we could address our needs now, but it would take raising the current tax rate, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
You get some homework.
Thank you. So, you're so charged.
We're poised and ready.
All right, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Next is the school calendar revisions. Dr. Reveille is going to explain the need for these suggested date changes.
Hi, good evening. This will be really quick. This is a simple change of the calendar that you all approved last December. So it's for next school year, the 15-16 school year. And the simple change is that we noticed that a late start at a high school was one day after spring break. It was the Monday returning from spring break, and that probably isn't the best idea for kids or for parents. So we are going to scoot that late start back a week, and then it impacts the two next late starts. So it's a very simple change to a calendar from last year affecting the high school late starts, and you can see on the agenda the new dates.
Is that the right column you're talking about,
The
328?
suggested new dates.
And the other two are affected?
I'm sorry?
And it moves the other two?
Moves them as a result
well.
of moving
That's
the
what
one
I thought.
off the Monday after spring break.
Any other questions?
Has it gone through the usual calendar committee? And
No, late starts, remember, late starts and early dismissal don't
That's
go through the
right.
calendar committee. So this is a simple change that
I
came
remember
out of
that
high school
presentation.
principals.
Okay, I need a motion to approve revisions to the high school late start days for the 2015-2016 school calendar.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying A.
Okay.
Yes.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Ms. Beto, that carried.
7-0.
Okay, next is a action item, revision of the policy 0320, school board elections and terms, first reading. Dr. Knos and Ms. Beto.
So this, obviously, when you make a motion, would be to postpone, because this is the first reading. This is related to a PIN that you all approved. It's tied to recent legislation that suggests, beginning with the next election, the candidates for school board, including current board members who are running for re-election, will be required to file an affidavit with the Missouri Department of Revenue swearing that they are not delinquent on payment, other state income taxes, municipal taxes, personal property taxes, and real property taxes on the address the candidate claims on his or her declaration of candidacy. Those files were attached that received attorney review, and so it's presented to you as a first read to move forward.
All right, I need a motion to postpone approval of policy 0320 until the January 8th, 2015 Board of Education meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, yes.
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 Opposed, no. Ms. Beto, that carries as well. Next is revision of policy 6230, textbook selection and adoption. This is a first reading as well. Dr. Hargadine, if you would come forward.
Thank you. Good evening. This, if you remember, this policy was one that was brought forward through a PIN from a parent in the district last spring, and you guys gave us permission to look at this policy. We did review all of our current policies that we had. We did not find a policy that addressed the PIN as it was presented. So after going through and reviewing all of our current policies, we then also did some research We reviewed policies from neighboring districts and districts of similar size and demographics as ours. We also reviewed the MSBA policies to find anything that was likened to the PIN that was brought forward. Once we did all of that background information, we also formed a committee. That committee was made up of administrators and teachers. Many of them, I think, started the evening with us, but have somewhat given up on our lateness. But we did have Deb Asher, Debbie Brandt, Dana Thorne, Lauren Haar, Mike McAteer, Steve Clawwitter, Paul Stanley, all were a part of the committee for looking through this PIN. We were able to meet on one occasion face-to-face, and then we did a lot of electronic meetings after that. We looked through the research, we looked through other policies, we took the PIN that was presented and compiled all of that information, and with that, we looked through, after we went through all of that, we decided that we probably did need to do something to address the PIN. And while we looked through our current policies, we found that the policy that most likely matched that PIN also needed a little bit of revision. And that is the attached policy, that is that policy 6230. That particular policy dealt with textbook selection and adoption, which also falls under instructional materials, which is where that PIN kind of went into. The textbook selection policy really outlined our textbook selection and had mandated that we had a text for every course. In our electronic age, that is no longer really applicable. We have many courses that we do online things with. And so by saying that we would have a free text for every course was a little erroneous at this point in time. So they both of the fact finding for the PIN and finding that policy allowed us to make some changes through the PIN process. So you notice that the policy that you have in front of you is the revised policy, the policy 6230. You'll notice that in the second paragraph of the new policy, the sentence that begins, audiovisual materials should be consistent with and promote the educational philosophy and goals of the school district and facilitate the attainment of specific educational objectives. That is the specific line that relates to the PIN that was brought forward. However, the body of that policy is really MSBA's policy regarding textbook and instructional material selection. So we were fortunate to go through that. You'll notice there is also a regulation 6230 that is attached. This section that says selection criteria for audiovisual material, that section is all new. We were able to revise the regulation to match the policy and match the intent of the PIN that came forward. I think that a lot of compliments goes to our committee that was helpful in organizing and writing this. We were really able to address many things with this. We were able to address the intent of the PIN. We were able to address teacher autonomy. We were able to address the textbook selection and material selection. So we actually ended up with a much better policy in the end by being able to look at it. So we wanted to thank you for allowing us to do that. And so this is your first read of your new policy and regulation.
Any questions?
Yeah, one on the regulation 6230, you don't show it redlined to match the title change to the policy 6230. You probably should.
Do you want to?
Because it has not been approved for a change yet. Right now it exists to match the policy. And if the board decides to change the name of the title of the policy, then the superintendent cabinet we would match that name.
Correct.
The regulation would support the policy. But we can't change it until it's approved and changed, to be changed.
We would follow that administratively.
Right.
Per the board's change of the policy.
Makes sense?
All right.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
So audiovisual materials to be used in classrooms must be, that is all new?
Correct. That whole section, that selection criteria for audiovisual, where it defines what audiovisual material is, and that is quite an encompassing definition. It has anything and everything you could just about have as audiovisual, but then that whole section is new. That was, we looked at many different policies from other districts and then kind of morphed it into our own, and that's where that section came from. But yeah, that whole section is new, and then the references on the back
that references the copyrighted materials and the teaching about controversial issues. All of this was reviewed by our legal team, and those were all suggestions as well from them.
So before this time, I mean, if this goes through, teachers right now are not required to obtain approval from the building administrator at least 1 week prior.
Correct.
For any movie.
And right now, yes, that is absolutely correct. And that was one of the things that when we worked through the committee, we did not want to make the teachers have to go to their administrator for everything that they would ever show in the classroom. Our teachers do a phenomenal job of picking supplementary materials for our classrooms. They will pick appropriate YouTube videos. There's all kinds of streaming videos. There's all kinds of things that are directly related to the curriculum. We did not wish to handcuff the teachers with a policy that would cause them to have to ask the administrators for every single thing that they show. We felt like teacher autonomy is extremely important as long as that is related to the curriculum. That is why it's spelled out here that it is only that they have to ask permission for something if it is extremely not related to the curriculum. So if they wanted to show Snow White in an advanced biology class, which would not be related to the curriculum in any way, shape, or form, but if there was some reason that they would need have a conversation with their administrator and get permission and figure out what that reason was. But if it's something that's absolutely related to the curriculum, there is no reason for them to have to go through that process.
All right, thank you.
I wanted to ask.
Go ahead.
I noticed on the policy, it starts out in the red line section. It is responsible for the board to make provisions for the selection of up-to-date and appropriate textbooks. And down under the first paragraph on the green, it goes in and says the board is responsible for the selection of instructional materials. Since the board is a policy-making body, it delegates to professional personnel of the district the authority for the selection. That will not in any way tie up future boards' hands to not approve any type of material to which they are adamantly opposed. We still have the authority to approve
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't lose your authority.
That's correct.
Did you say you
You don't lose
You
your
would not,
authority.
no, correct.
No,
You
yeah.
would not lose
Right.
your authority to do
Right.
that. Yes.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? I need a motion to postpone approval of policy 6230 until the January 8th, 2015 Board of Education meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? All in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes? Opposed, no?
No. Can we get rid of the green next time?
I didn't do I don't know.
Did you say no?
Yeah, I did.
He did say no.
I said no.
Okay.
I'll look at the colors next time on what's
Yeah.
submitted and make sure we can see it on a screen.
All right.
Yeah.
It was red originally. I'm not sure how it ended up green,
I-
but
Right, something, I'll confirm that next time.
What color would you like, Dr. Taylor?
By the way, Ms. Beto will pass.
Something I could see. I couldn't see it.
I couldn't see it on my laptop.
All
I
right.
blew it up on my iPad.
I'm going to apologize to Mr. Watzik. He's coming up to talk about policy 2130, harassment, and he and Dr. Revelay are going to present.
And I'm going to give a little background while they're settling in on the Transition Act tonight, if you haven't noticed. Just a reminder that you notice there's not a motion here, and we're going to get around to explaining that. This originated with a couple of things. Students bringing not only to our attention in advance, they also came and talked at a board meeting, and we had 3 pins related to this as well that really came in conjunction with the students or after the students presented. The concern was that transgender students were not adequately protected against harassment in our policy. And I just want to point out that anytime we look at policy because we're worried about it not being adequate, that's the question we're going to ask our attorney is it an adequate policy? And I just want to be very clear as we discuss this that as all of my team is our own witnesses, our intent, we wanted to make sure that all kids, including the kids that talked to us that night, are adequately covered within our policy. That is our intent. From that point forward, we turn it over to our legal counsel to tell us if in fact our policy does in fact do that. So I'm going to stop there and let Mr. Watsak and Dr. Revelay talk us through what was found.
And actually, I was going to say, well said, Dr. Knos, but the purpose, and we relied heavily on our legal counsel in examining these 3 pins, because we wanted to ensure that all students are protected. And tonight we're here to talk about what our policy says, how it currently is protecting, did and will continue to protect students in a wide variety of areas. And like I said, tonight Larry's here to talk about the summary of what we found, and we did rely heavily on our legal counsel for the research.
Good evening. As Dr. Knos said, he asked us to look at policy 2130 and a regulation 2130 to ensure that all kids are protected from harassment or discrimination, specifically including transgender children. We checked pretty thoroughly. We looked at the statutory law, both federal and state. We looked at the case law as it's emerged, especially since 1990, there was a seminal United States Supreme Court case, which we can talk about if we have time. And we also looked at what are administrative agencies doing, specifically the United States Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, because if they came on campus, what would they expect the policy and regulations to look? And it's pretty clear. Having looked at all that, it's pretty clear that gender discrimination is now widely accepted as a form of sexual discrimination. The primary statutory law that gives that protection to students in school settings is the federal Title IX. And now it's clear, looking at the case law and looking at what OCR is recommending, the Title IX sex discrimination prohibition does extend to claims of discrimination based on gender identity, and it also covers children who choose not to conform to gender stereotyping. That's pretty common language in the cases, and it's the same language that you'll see in letters that have been published by the OCR. So we looked at the policy, and keep in mind that the protection that's afforded to gender identity children or children with expressing a gender different from what they were given at birth is based on Title IX, and the only reference in Title IX is to sex discrimination. So as long as the policy prohibits sex discrimination or harassment based on sex, the policy is legally adequate. And we work from a presumption that a policy is intended to be the board's broad statement, and the regulation is to incorporate the more specific behaviors that you want to call attention so that the principals and the teachers and the administrators know what they're enforcing. When we looked at the regulation 2130, we did have some significant changes. If you want to bring it up, or you can look at it, we thought that gender discrimination should follow immediately after sex discrimination because of the relationship I just explained to you. There were a number of behaviors that were kind of grouped under sex discrimination that we felt clearly should be incorporated into gender discrimination rather than sex discrimination. And then we added some new language specifically on gender identity and gender expression that leaves no doubt, if you're a principal or a teacher, you're asking, is that sort of behavior prohibited? It is very clear in the regulation that is now prohibited. So having said that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain questions. The bottom line is the policy is legally adequate. The regulation could be enhanced. We recommended to Dr. Knos and Dr. Rebele that the administration change the regulation per our recommendations.
The concept of the regulation getting more into specificity of the policy, and the policy staying more overarching, but again, that it is adequate to protect all of our students.
Any other questions or comments?
What's the harm in putting it in
The harm? I would tell you that the more the policy conforms to the statutory protected classes, the better off you are. And the MSBA takes the same approach. It's not just my personal opinion. So the closer that the policy stays with the statute, and the statute is the legal basis that you're going to perhaps discipline a student, the more we go away from the statute, the more legal issues can develop. Could you do it? Yes, you could do it. Do I recommend you do it? I would prefer that you not do it. I would prefer that the policy stay as close to the statute and the regulation get into the very specific behaviors that you're all trying to prohibit. And based on what we've recommended to Dr. Knos and Dr. Rebele, it does.
And it's hard to see, I know, but you can see it up there. It's like Larry suggested, we moved harassment based on gender to the beginning of the regulation. And it's really difficult to see, I know, but there's a specific example related to intimidation or hostility based on gender or gender stereotyping. And it's very specific to the explanation in the regulation.
I'd be happy to read it if anybody can't see it, because that's really the most important change we're recommending, that it leaves no doubt, there's no doubt in any principal's mind or any teacher's mind that if they see this behavior, it is absolutely prohibited. And I think that's what you're after.
And it's no less enforceable because it's in a regulation instead of a policy. It's
They're both enforceable.
Still the rule of the land, right?
Yes, sir. They're both enforceable.
Ms. Paul, does this address your issue that you brought up?
Yeah, I believe so. I wish they were here.
I think all of us, I think we all shared common ground with the pins and with the students, that we wanted to make sure they were adequately covered. And that's the answer. And
Yes, sir.
we keep the policy aligned to statute, but we go into the regulation administratively and we change or add the language that then gives the specificity that was being requested. So it really, it does accomplish, I think, the general consensus of all the pins and what was being asked of us that evening.
Any others? Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Watzek, for your patience. Dr. Revelay. Okay, proposed agenda for the January 8th, 2015 Board of Education meeting. Take a look and see if there's anything on there that you'd like to add to or delete from.
We would have second readings for
Right.
both of the first readings we had tonight, and then per the agreed upon charge, we would have the capital projects funding report number 2. And yeah, are we going to have a COPE meeting before?
When's our next?
No, 15th of January.
Oh, that's
But
right.
do we have a presentation that night in regards to PD from COPE?
Curriculum, I think, is prior to that meeting.
Do they know it?
Curriculum, yes.
Karen know it or whoever?
We
Shane
said
know it?
January for
Shane know it?
curriculum. Did we say the?
Dr. Arcanine and people from her department.
People from where?
Per department?
Oh.
Ms. Beto, you caught that about the
I thought you
capital
said
funding
Schnucks.
Just
report?
write it in green.
Okay, is it an addition? Okay, very good. Just want to make sure. All right, any others?
Yes, I had talked to Gretchen before the meeting about moving up the presentation about the gifted program, not the committee, but the presentation for professional development to the 8th. Gretchen, I think you were going to check the calendar.
You mentioned that before the meeting, and I know that we were talking about doing curriculum, and I don't know if we would do, the reason for curriculum was because there are some curriculum presentations coming at the next January meeting. And I don't know if we would do 2 that night.
Well,
or
let's
we would
look
do
into it and see if
gifted.
it's.
Or what are we doing in February?
Are we doing the
We
next
have
January meeting?
March
What's the next
the
one?
next
January?
What?
What's the next January?
Yeah, we have a second
meeting.
January.
Yeah, we have a second January meeting.
What do we have on that one?
Yeah.
The
Do you have any
second
idea?
one in January, we don't have anything scheduled. The first meeting in February, we have legislative update, and this is all subject to you guys
Yeah.
deciding, but.
How about that second
And
January?
the second January is open.
So, Ms. Rogers, you're saying put the gifted on the second January meeting?
Yeah, whatever
then?
that is.
January 22nd is the
Okay.
date. So
Gretchen, did you catch that?
recommendation is to do a gifted PD on January 22nd.
All right.
Is there a deadline to worry about on that, or just want to get it on up, get it on up?
Yeah, just want to do it. I mean, we're here.
Okay. I'm just worried that we've missed the deadline of some sort, but I didn't think we had.
Right now, we had it scheduled for the, a gifted program overview on April 23rd. But this would
That's
be
what
different
committee.
than, this is what you.
That's-
This is part of the board's professional development
Right.
calendar. And so we'll just add that. So we
Describe the
have
program,
2
educate, but not the committee.
Correct, correct. We'll have 2 PDs in January. Correct.
We're just
One at-
trying
one
to
at
make
both
one
meetings.
every month, figuring that one meeting that we had PD would be a lighter schedule, but as long as you're good, Dr. Knost, with.
Well, my one concern about the January 22nd meeting is, I thought that that would be the first curriculum presentation night, and those are lengthy. And there's a lot of them.
So can we do February?
So maybe COPE committee could look at this then, and I don't know, we have gifted January 22nd, the next meeting is February 5th, you have legislative update. If you would bump those down. We could wait and see
The
how long.
legislative update in March?
We could change that. Yeah.
We could do it that first week,
And we'll look at that agenda in January. If curriculum isn't ready that night, and they're going to go February, then we'll do the PD in January. But I think the plan is to do.
All right.
That's plenty to work with.
So that gives you options there.
Look at the links of it.
Okay, you also received a typed copy of future events to attend. Any other discussion or comments? Good evening, we are adjourned.